Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Nichola Sweeney. The most terrible cases in the history of forensics are murders that are not motivated by anything at all. Nichola Sweeney was born 6 weeks premature in a hospital in the large city of Cork, Ireland, in October 1981. After her birth, both the baby and her mother were forced to spend 2 weeks in intensive care, but the doctors managed to save her life and avoid developmental problems associated with prematurity. Despite the accompanying challenges, the birth of a girl became a great joy for her parents. John and his wife, Josephine Sweeney, had wanted to have a child for a long time. However, they were haunted by failures, including 3 miscarriages that followed one after another. Young parents almost despaired, so the birth of their daughter became a real miracle, followed by a bright streak in their lives. 3 years after the birth of their daughter, the family was expecting another addition, a son named Sean. Finally, mother and father felt complete happiness. After all, this is what the ideal family looked like in the imagination of them. Meanwhile, the entire family moved to London due to the development of the parents' business. At that time, Nichola was 1 year old. For the next 15 years, Nichola and her parents regularly visited Ireland at least once a year to meet with loved ones. They continued to live in England because London offered more prospects and better earnings. Most often, they visited her grandparents in Ireland. It was there that Nichola developed a true love for nature. When visiting the countryside, she enjoyed interacting with animals, but most of all, she liked horses. It is not surprising that, against this background, she became a vegetarian. At a slightly older age, she began to work with horses in London. She loved to ride these majestic animals and attended the local church when she started going to primary school. There, she also developed a love for music and art. Nichola became a member of the church choir and participated in Irish dances at the local parish. Nichola was generally very proud of her roots and adored her native country of Ireland. Against this background, she constantly asked her parents to move back with her. However, her father and mother's business was actively developing, so they could not give up their favorite pursuit. Instead of moving back, they put the house in Ireland up for sale. It was a great family home, an almost century-old building located on a hillside overlooking the ocean, surrounded by greenery in a very picturesque area. At first, Nichola was upset, fearing that she would never see this place again. However, circumstances changed, and the parents' business began to gain momentum, providing enough funds for more frequent trips to Ireland. In addition, the mother and father did not want to lose touch with their homeland, so they refused to sell the property. At the age of 16, Nichola, along with her brother and parents, moved back for a while to that very house, which they had managed to save. This was necessary because, during this period, her mother and father had a third child, a boy named Christopher. They wanted to raise the baby in a calmer environment. In 1997, 16-year-old Nichola began attending a school located in the center of Cork. Due to the move, she had to change educational institutions again. However, she fit in well with new groups. A little later, Nichola met Sinead O'Leary, who was very similar to her in many ways, even sharing the story of her parents moving to London. Sinead's mother and father had also decided to return to Ireland. In 1998, just a year after Nichola's family moved back, the teenagers immediately became close. Their similar backgrounds and even appearances facilitated this bond. Both girls had a strong London accent, which made them stand out among the local teenagers. They were also quite shy, but Nichola supported Sinead, who entered this school a year later and faced great difficulties communicating with her peers. The girl did not fit into the team easily, and Nichola understood her struggles. She accepted Sinead as a kindred spirit. Their friendship began when Nichola suggested going to the cinema with a group of her friends during a break. The girls stepped outside to talk and ended up not returning for the rest of the film because they realized their similarities and became best friends. Nichola really valued this relationship. In the pages of her diary, Sinead wrote that Nichola had become a second family where she could behave naturally and be herself. Sinead had a tendency to take everything to heart, while her friend calmed her down. This was especially noticeable during exams. Sinead was very worried, but next to Nichola, she felt calmer, as if she were with an older sister. Nichola evoked strong feelings in many who knew her well. She had an excellent relationship with her brother Sean. The teenagers supported each other, especially when their parents were forced to travel to London for work. Nichola usually stayed behind, as her parents took Christopher with them, believing he was too young to be left in Ireland under the care of teenagers. Most of the time, their mother babysat while working part-time as a waitress at a local cafe in the city's shopping centre. Sinead attended another university and was frequently traveling to Dublin. Consequently, the girls began to see each other less often, but they maintained warm relations. Every time the friends were together, they simply talked and enjoyed each other's company, often spending the night and having fun. On the evening of Saturday, April 27, 2002, Sinead visited her friend. It was an ordinary day for them, as the students planned to spend the weekend together, hanging out in the city with friends. When Nichola turned 20 years old, she returned home from her part-time job to prepare for an evening outing to the city center. Her colleagues said goodbye to her that evening, unaware that it would be the last time they would see her alive. Nichola left the cafe at 7 p.m., and her best friend was already waiting for her near the house where she was preparing dinner. They discussed their upcoming exams. Their parents were in London and were not planning to return for another week. As usual, their mother and father had taken their younger brother with them. Sean was still working at the hotel, where he served as an administrator. Before going home, he called his mother and spoke for about 10 minutes, promising to call again later that evening. After 8 p.m., all three of them, Nichola, Sinead, and Sean, were at the family home having dinner. It seemed like an ordinary evening for the young people. Nothing foreshadowed the horrific events that would follow this gathering. Meanwhile, in a pub not far from the family home, three young men were unwinding: Barry Dolan, Cy McCarthy, and Peter Whelan. The latter was well known to law enforcement agencies due to his involvement in criminal activity. Peter was respected by no one, and everyone, friends included, feared his unpredictability. He had a criminal history, having been implicated in a robbery on Christmas Eve 2001. He had crashed a private party without an invitation, was thrown out, and returned to attack several attendees with a glass bottle, injuring a number of people, although fortunately, no one sustained serious injuries. All the victims lived near the Sweeney family, and while Nichola knew them, she did not associate with them. Additionally, their dangerous neighbor skillfully concealed his criminal dealings, so the heroine of the story generally viewed them with indifference. On that April evening, in the pub, the group of young men began to insult others present. Peter behaved threateningly, as if he were trying to provoke a fight. The bartender refused to serve him, hoping the group would leave the establishment. Peter pretended to agree, but it was a ruse. As soon as the bartender turned away, he jumped over the counter and grabbed a heavy ceramic ashtray. He intended to smash it on the bartender's head, but one of the patrons shouted in time. The man managed to dodge a direct blow, and the ashtray barely missed, causing only minor injuries to him. Following this, the police were called. Law enforcement officers checked the group of young people, who were all sober and showed no signs of injury. Peter and his companions were asked to leave. Frustrated, all three headed to Barry's house. However, his mother refused to let Peter and Cy stay overnight. Consequently, Peter decided to walk his girlfriend home. As they walked, she noticed how angry he was. He could barely contain his rage and walked a few steps ahead, fists clenched. Peter escorted his girlfriend home, but he still struggled to manage his anger. He felt humiliated for being thrown out of the bar and was unable to take revenge on the bartender. Additionally, the mother of his friend had refused to let him into the house, which insulted him further. In the end, filled with frustration, Peter headed home. However, he did not plan to stay there for long. Quietly, he took 2 kitchen knives. His mother was worried about why he was late. Peter insisted that he had been attacked at the bar, so he spent a lot of time talking to the police. After that, he silently left the house without telling anyone where he was going. He headed towards Sweeney's house, which was surrounded by a high fence, behind which was a garden. This did not stop Peter. He easily climbed over the fence and found himself in the courtyard. He walked along the driveway and tried to open the front door of the house. However, it was locked. Inside, two girls were having dinner. Nichola and Sinead and her friend were planning to go downtown after dinner. They were watching a movie but then decided to start getting ready to meet friends. At the moment when Peter entered the house through the window, all three were distractedly discussing their plans for the evening, completely oblivious to the impending danger. Meanwhile, Sean had decided to attend the 40th birthday party of his best friend's mother, which was taking place on the other side of town. He asked a friend for a ride to the event, but he arrived too early. Sean offered his sister and her girlfriend a ride to the center, but they weren't ready yet and refused. Instead, Nichola had already arranged for transport and didn't want to let him down. At 10:30 p.m., before leaving, Sean called his mother again, but she couldn't answer because she was trying to put the capricious Christopher to bed. Because of this, the woman missed the opportunity to hear her daughter's voice for the last time in her life. Sean left, leaving the two girls in the house. Sinead and Nichola were sitting on the bed in the bedroom, doing the final touches to their makeup. Nichola was facing the corridor while her friend sat closer to the door, but with her back to her. Unexpectedly, Nichola saw a dark figure appear on the stairs. The uninvited guest was silent, and Nichola couldn't understand who it was. She called out to the dark figure, thinking it was her brother Sean playing an unsuccessful joke, but the shadow didn't answer and began to move slowly toward the open door. When the stranger stepped into the light, Nichola realized it was Peter, her neighbor. He didn't immediately take out the knives but silently attacked Sinead. He delivered the first blow, hitting her several times with his hands and feet. The girl was disoriented and fell to the floor, but the villain continued to beat her before pulling out one of the knives and continuing the assault with a deadly weapon. At this point, she was paralyzed with horror and simply begged Peter to stop. Additionally, he acted quickly, and Nichola barely had time to gather her thoughts to help her friend. But the criminal wasn't done. Sinead suffered more than a dozen knife wounds while lying on the floor, desperately resisting. Peter stood over her, using his weight to prevent the girls from screaming or crying, while the attacker relentlessly struck blow after blow. Finally, distracted from his first victim, he looked at Nichola and took out a second knife, screaming as he rushed at her. At that moment, Nichola regained her senses. She ran in the hope of reaching the phone or getting outside to call for help. In her attempt to escape from the attacker, she received 11 stab wounds. The killer blocked her exit from the room, leaving her with only one escape path through the open window. Nichola, in despair, tried to get out. At that moment, Peter caught up with her, stabbing her in the heart before continuing the attack. Surprisingly, Sinead was still alive despite the severe injuries. She was bleeding and slipping away from the attacker. This horrifying scene unfolded in pitch darkness. Later, the investigation revealed that, upon entering the house, the attacker had turned off all the lights he could until he was finally noticed while going down the stairs. Only the bedroom remained illuminated, covered in blood. The criminal again looked for his other victim but was unable to find her. He ultimately decided that she was already dead. Wandering around the second floor, he made ominous sounds, which Sinead heard and prayed would not be directed toward her. Eventually, the criminal lost interest in his victims and left the house. As soon as she heard this, Sinead mustered her courage and left the locked bathroom. First, she went to Nichola, who was lying next to the window in a pool of blood, having lost consciousness. Sinead was very weak and could barely stand, but she managed to grab her mobile phone to call emergency services, then her father. She knew he would arrive at the house in a few minutes since he lived nearby. Unfortunately, 20-year-old Nichola died from her wounds in the arms of her friend just a couple of minutes later. Sinead's father arrived immediately and supported his daughter while trying to provide first aid to both of them. Despite the efforts of the first responders, Nichola lost consciousness due to her injuries. Meanwhile, in the Sweeney house, police and medical teams were working hard. Peter returned to his home to see the result of his actions. Noticing the police and ambulance, he thought both girls were dead. After that, Peter ran to his uncle and pretended to be one of the concerned neighbors gathering near the house. Peter approached with the others and saw Sinead being carried out on a stretcher. Sinead was badly injured but alive. She gave a detailed description of her attacker, and the police interrogated her, fearing she could lose consciousness again or even die. This all happened around midnight. A patrolman recognized Peter, as he matched the description provided by the survivor. When the policeman approached him and voiced his suspicions, Peter immediately became aggressive, threatening the officer, claiming he was dangerous. It was decided to detain him for questioning at the station. According to Irish law, detectives are not allowed to deny a suspect sleep, so Peter Whelan had the opportunity to rest and also contemplate what had happened until morning. This gave him precious time to try to formulate a justification for his actions, but he failed to come up with a plausible lie. Eventually, he confessed to the attack, claiming that he was driven by voices in his head, blaming his actions on a long-standing mental illness. However, forensic experts were surprised to find nothing unusual in Peter's blood. There were no traces of alcohol or banned substance, which was confirmed by toxicological tests. Additionally, there were no documented cases of mental illness in his history, and he was not registered with any relevant clinic. Experts concluded that he was completely healthy. The question remained, what could have motivated a young man to attack two girls who had done nothing to him? Peter was charged with 2 counts of murder of Nichola and attempted murder of Sinead, after which he was jailed pending the hearing. Detectives gathered all possible information to find a motive. Nichola was buried in County Kerry, near the place of her birth, which her mother always associated with the happiest moments of her life. Meanwhile, the doctors managed to pull Sinead back from the brink, but her face was covered with scars from the attack. The road to her physical and mental recovery would be long. On October 31, 2002, a hearing was scheduled for the case of murder and attempted murder. The victim's family expected it to be a straightforward hearing, with the killer separated from others and the families placed in different areas of the courtroom, as is typical. However, the case drew such a large crowd that the courtroom was completely packed, with no free seats left, and some people were forced to stand. Families of both the victims and the accused sat shoulder to shoulder, creating a chaotic atmosphere. The trial commenced and was expected to be short since Peter Whelan had confessed. It was clear that he showed no remorse, even making cruel jokes about Nichola and Sinead during the hearing. A major inconvenience for Nichola's family was the judge's decision to forbid them from reading their statements to the killer, denying them the opportunity to express their thoughts about the criminal. During a break, the seats of the victim's family were taken by the relatives of the defendant, and they had to move as there was no room for Nichola's brother. When the killer was brought into the courtroom in handcuffs, his father stood up and patted his son on the shoulder in a show of support, which appeared shockingly cynical to the families of Nichola and Sinead. Ultimately, Peter Whelan was sentenced to 15 years in prison for attacking Sinead, in addition to the life sentence for Nichola's murder. In his sentencing, the judge emphasized that this crime was one of the most brutal in the history of Ireland. What was particularly shocking was the complete absence of a motive. Peter claimed he acted out of uncontrollable anger for perceived slights and decided to punish 2 innocent girls who had done nothing to him. Just a month after starting his prison sentence, the case continued to draw national attention. Peter filed an appeal, but all his appeals were ultimately rejected. Throughout his imprisonment, he filed 9 appeals and even tried to reach the Supreme Court. Each of these events was accompanied by hearings, to which the family of Nichola and Sinead were forced to attend. Peter seemed determined to force them to relive the circumstances of the attack again and again. They could not ignore these court summons because they did not want to give this monster even the slightest chance to achieve a mitigated sentence. Against the backdrop of Peter's impudent behavior, numerous questions arose about the legal system. Under Irish law, the appeal fee and the provision of a lawyer from the state are paid for by taxpayers. Hundreds of thousands of euros were spent on this. In fact, the victims of the attacker were paying for him to get a chance at freedom to continue his crimes. Naturally, many people thought this was unfair, especially the families of Nichola and Sinead, who felt the imperfections of justice. Peter's defenders managed to achieve a change in the order of serving his sentences, meaning that he first had to serve 15 years for the attempted murder before the life sentence would begin. To the surprise of the Sweeney and O'Leary families, after 17 years of imprisonment, the criminal was eligible for temporary release. He was repeatedly taken from prison to Cork, where he spent his time quite legally. Moreover, the correctional system did not even warn the families of the victims that the most dangerous criminal was at large next to them. It became known that Sinead was never able to fully rehabilitate herself after the attack. Even after 10 years, she still had an overwhelming fear of the dark and suffered from nightmares. To cope, she got a German Shepherd, which helped her feel at least a little calmer. The families of the victims repeatedly contacted the Irish correctional system, trying to get at least some comments about Peter, but all requests were ignored. It was believed that the temporary release was completely legal according to the parole board. Peter had almost completely served his 15-year sentence, although in fact, he completed only 11 years for attempted murder and received parole as a model prisoner, beginning his life sentence only 6 years later. Peter was first released in 2018 on compassionate grounds due to the death of his mother, Mary. He was granted temporary release to say goodbye to her. However, it seemed that the law enforcement system showed no compassion for the parents of Nichola or her friend, who miraculously survived the massacre. Subsequent temporary releases were based on recommendations from the parole board as part of the rehabilitation program for criminals of the Supreme Court, which is not mandated by law. These recommendations continue to cause controversy in Ireland. There are often cases when prisoners serving long sentences are given opportunities for release, but this happens extremely rarely in the early stages of life sentences. According to the Commission's comments, each case of temporary release is considered individually. In Peter's case, he was deemed a model prisoner. He initially spent 2 years in Cork prison, after which he was transferred to a maximum security correctional facility for 13 years. In 2018, he was transferred again, this time to a prison called Wakefield, which is considered to have a less severe regime. However, in 2019, the government confirmed that Rochestown murderer Peter Whelan would remain in custody until at least 2025 under the new Pardons Act. Under the Act, prisoners sentenced to life will be eligible to apply for parole after serving 12 years of their life sentence. This does not mean, of course, that they will be eligible for parole at that point. The department also confirmed that the Act will apply to both new and retroactive sentences. The new 12-year eligibility threshold will apply to prisoners sentenced to life regardless of whether the sentence was imposed before or after the Act came into force. The announcement was welcomed by the families of Whelan's victims. The Sweeney and O'Leary families are now calling on the minister to act quickly, so it can take effect before Whelan's next parole hearing, currently scheduled for November 2020. When Sinead first learned that the killer had the right to temporary release and was periodically walking the streets of her hometown, she immediately declared that this monster would definitely kill again and therefore should not be released into society, even for a short time. She also stated that if he was released, she would be forced to leave her hometown because she simply wouldn't be able to feel safe. Now, they are trying to ensure that Peter remains behind bars and is unable to return to his hometown, where the families of Sinead and Nichola live.
On October 19, 2021, a cool autumn day in Wood Street, Kettering, a peaceful market town in Northamptonshire. Wood Street, with its simple homes and ghost houses, was alive with the usual sounds of everyday life, neighbors chatting, cars passing by, children returning home from school. But just after noon, that tranquility was shattered. Marta Kmieleka, a 31-year-old woman whose life was cut short, leaving her community in turmoil and her family forever altered. Northamptonshire police received a call expressing concern for a person's welfare at a residence on Wood Street. A family member had not heard from their loved one for several days and sensed that something was wrong. Officers arrived expecting to conduct a routine welfare check. They forced their way into a rented room and discovered a scene that initiated one of the town's most disturbing crime investigations. Marta was dead. The small, cluttered room was filled with secrets that would take months to uncover. What happened here? The police cordoned off the street, and neighbors watched in shock as forensic teams arrived. Residents from nearby told reporters they had never witnessed anything like this in Kettering. A neighbor expressed his disbelief. Wood Street was meant to be a safe place where nothing significant ever occurred. To reconstruct the timeline of Marta's last hours, investigators analyzed surveillance footage, which became a key piece of evidence. Detectives focused on a crucial time, the night of October 15th, just 4 days before Marta's body was discovered. So, who was she? Marta was a lively, kind, and independent woman who greatly impacted those around her. Marta grew up in Bydgoszcz, a vibrant city in northern Poland known for its charming riverside and close-knit communities. Her family considered her full of life, always smiling, and eager to help. Marta had a special ability to make people feel valued, whether she was assisting a neighbor with groceries or enjoying long conversations with friends over coffee. Her brother and sister-in-law, who later spoke at her inquest, described her as the glue of their family, someone who was always ready to help without needing to be asked. In Poland, Marta had a strong relationship with her parents, especially her father. Friends referred to her as a daddy's girl, not because she was spoiled, but because of the close and unwavering bond they had. She would call her father just to share her day. He listened with pride as he watched her grow into a confident woman. Marta also loved her brother's children and took her aunt duty seriously. She would spoil them with small gifts, play with them, or simply listen to their stories. Her family said she had a natural warmth that made everyone feel valued. At around 25 years old, Marta met Paweł Chmielecki, who was a few years her senior. Paweł was charming, confident, and had a passion for cars, particularly BMWs, which he loved to showcase. Paweł was drawn to her lively personality. Their friends noted that they seemed like an ideal couple. Marta's outgoing nature balanced Paweł's more reserved demeanor. They bonded over common interests like music, weekend trips, and dreams of a life outside of Poland. For Marta, who was always eager to explore and ambitious, Paweł appeared to be a partner who shared her aspirations for new adventures. Their relationship progressed quickly. After dating for a couple of years, they were ready to move forward. On July 29, 2016, Marta and Paweł married in a small, joyful ceremony in Bydgoszcz. The day was filled with family, laughter, and Polish traditions. Marta's family, especially her father, was delighted to see her so happy. The couple settled into their married life by renting an apartment in Bydgoszcz. For a while, it seemed like the life Marta had dreamed of, stable, loving, and aimed at a bright future. Marta and Paweł had ambitious goals. They sought more than what Bydgoszcz could provide. They wanted opportunities for personal growth, better earnings, and a chance to immerse themselves in a new culture. In 2017, they decided to take a significant step. They moved to England. They chose Kettering, a small town in Northamptonshire, partly because Marta's brother and his family already lived there. This move was a big leap for them. They packed their belongings, said farewells to their families, and arrived in the UK with optimism. Kettering, with its peaceful streets and supportive Polish community, felt like the perfect place for a fresh start. They rented a home together, explored their new surroundings, began building a new life. They enjoyed their time in Kettering by going for walks and visiting local cafes and bars. Initially, the move seemed to deepen their relationship. Marta embraced her new life in Kettering, finding a job and making friends, while Paweł also adapted to his work. They often hosted dinners for Marta's brother and his children, with Marta happily playing the role of an aunt by bringing games and treats. Social media posts from that period captured their joy, showcasing them smiling with each other and sharing captions about their new adventures. Beneath the seemingly perfect moments, problems were emerging. Paweł, who had always been somewhat possessive, began to show a controlling behavior that Marta hadn't fully recognized back in Poland. He started questioning her whereabouts, the people she spent time with, and why she was making new friends. Marta, who valued her independence, struggled with being monitored. She wanted to live freely, not just exist under Paweł's watch. As time passed, Paweł's jealousy intensified. He was no longer just protective, he had become obsessive. While Marta was flourishing and expanding her social network within Kettering's Polish community, Paweł couldn't cope. He bombarded her with texts to find out her plans and would often show up unexpectedly where she was with friends. Those around her noticed that she didn't seem like herself anymore. Her usual vibrancy had faded. While Marta shrugged it off, saying Powell was just stressed or adjusting to life in England, her close friends could see the underlying tension. Though Marta always wore a smile, her family later revealed that she had spoken to them about Powell's behavior, hinting at arguments that left her feeling trapped. The tension between Powell and Marta escalated from emotional to physical abuse. Court records later showed 3 incidents of Powell's aggression toward Marta, one in August 2020, another during Easter 2021, and a third in September 2021, just weeks before the tragedy. These incidents were not isolated, they were part of a recurring pattern. Though always a strong-willed person, Marta began to fear the man she once loved. She confided in friends that she no longer recognized Powell. She felt suffocated by his jealousy. Despite her fears, she stayed with him, perhaps hoping for change or feeling burdened by their shared past. Powell's controlling behavior extended beyond their home as he harassed Marta's friends and tried to monitor her whereabouts, even stalking her by appearing at her workplace or waiting outside places she visited. By mid-2020, their marriage was falling apart. Marta moved out and found her own place in Kettering, determined to rebuild her life. She began to share her journey of personal growth on social media. Just 5 days before her life ended, she posted a photo with a caption in Polish: "One of the worst mistakes a person can make is wasting years of life waiting for another person to change or develop." This bold statement signified her desire to move on. She started dating again, forming a new relationship with a colleague and planning a future without Powell. Powell was not willing to let Marta go. He continued to text, call, and try to involve himself in her life, even as she tried to distance herself from him. Marta repeatedly pleaded with Powell through messages, asking him to stop contacting her. During their investigation, the police found clear evidence of Powell's obsessive behavior. His messages ranged from desperate pleas to threats, showing his refusal to accept that Marta wanted to end things. Her family, especially her brother and sister-in-law, became aware of her increasing discomfort. When she visited them, still remaining a caring aunt to their children, there was a noticeable sadness in her eyes. She was trying to break free, but Powell's presence felt overwhelming. Marta wasn't just ending a marriage, she was escaping from a constraint. The process of breaking up wasn't instantaneous but involved careful, intentional actions. She began by creating distance, reducing contact, and staying away from places where Powell might be. Marta shared her plans to divorce Powell, whose name was on their official marriage registered in Poland, with her brother and sister-in-law who lived nearby. She had started gathering the necessary paperwork, which involved coordinating with lawyers back in Bydgoszcz. Additionally, Marta found support from her friends in Kettering's Polish community. They surrounded her with invitations to dinners, gym sessions, and social outings, helping her reclaim the joy that Powell had suppressed. Powell was unable to let go. His jealousy, which had already caused him pain, developed into an obsession. He refused to accept that his relationship with Marta was over and continued to reach out to her despite her efforts to distance herself. Detective Superintendent later observed that Powell's actions became increasingly desperate. He bombarded Marta with calls and texts, sometimes pleading for another chance and at other times accusing her of betrayal. When she blocked his number, he resorted to using different phones or contacting her friends to gather information about her whereabouts. He would frequently appear at her favorite cafes or hang around her workplace, hoping to encounter her unexpectedly. Marta's friends noticed that she was becoming more anxious. She often looked over her shoulder when she was out. His behavior escalated to stalking. He would follow her from a distance, watching her every move, and once trailed her from her workplace to a friend's house, only leaving after being confronted by her friend. Marta confided in her brother that she felt trapped, as if Powell was always nearby. By October 2021, Marta was doing well despite the influence of Powell. She was excitedly planning a Christmas trip to Poland to visit her father, looking forward to her mother's visit to Kettering, and enjoying a new relationship. On Friday, October 15th, she spent the evening with friends, laughing and texting as they enjoyed drinks together at a local bar. She left around 10:40 p.m., looking sharp and confident as always. However, that night, something unexpected happened. On Monday, October 18th, Marta did not show up for work, which was out of character for her. Her colleagues, who were accustomed to her punctuality, became concerned. Her brother also grew anxious when she didn't answer his calls. The situation escalated when Marta's family received a text from her phone that sounded unusual. It was overly formal and lacked her typical warmth, suggesting it was written by someone else. Her sister-in-law, feeling that something was seriously wrong, suspected that Powell might be involved due to his history of controlling behavior. On Tuesday, October 19th, Marta's sister-in-law visited Powell's rented room on Wood Street. When nobody answered the door, her anxiety grew. She called emergency service to express her concerns about Marta's safety and mentioned Powell's previous aggressive behavior. The Northamptonshire police acted quickly, sending officers to perform a welfare check at the location. What they discovered was shocking. The officers forced their way into Powell's room, breaking down the door. Inside, they found Marta's lifeless body wrapped in a blood-stained duvet. She had suffered 32 sharp force injuries, including cuts to her neck, face, shoulders, and chest, with defensive wounds on her right hand, suggesting that she had fought back. Next to her was Powell, bleeding heavily from up to 9 self-inflicted wounds on his throat. The police immediately secured the area and called for paramedics. Marta was pronounced dead at the scene, her hopes for a new life shattered. Powell, still alive, was taken to the hospital. On October 21st, after confirming that his injuries were not life-threatening, Powell Kmielewski was arrested while in his hospital bed. The detective mentioned that Powell was uncooperative during the investigation. He also noted Powell's initial denial of any previous aggression towards Marta. When detectives interviewed Powell, he remained silent and did not provide any explanation for the events that took place in his room. They questioned him about Marta's final days, her unexplained absence from work, and a suspicious text message, but he revealed nothing, adding to the mystery. Questions arose. Why did Marta visit his room that night? Had Powell lured her there? What led to such a tragic outcome? Investigators established a timeline, revealing that Marta had not been seen since October 15th, and her body had likely been in Powell's room for nearly 4 days. During this time, Powell continued with his daily routine as if nothing had happened. A text sent from Marta's phone emerged as a significant clue, indicating that Powell may have attempted to conceal his involvement. Marta's family, particularly her brother and sister-in-law, were devastated. They had warned her to avoid Powell, but none could have anticipated the depths of his desperation. The investigation into Marta's death relied heavily on tangible evidence, with the security camera footage from Wood Street and surrounding areas being the most telling. Northamptonshire police thoroughly searched CCTV and Ring doorbell recordings, which provided a disturbing glimpse into Marta's final moments. On Friday, October 15, 2021, Marta spent the evening at her friend's house on Woodland Court, enjoying herself and having a good time. She was texting, laughing, and sharing flirtatious messages with a colleague she was dating. At the same time, she received persistent messages from Powell, who was urging her to come over to his place and even asked her to bring pizza. The previous day, she had told him off in a message and requested that he leave her alone. Despite this, Powell continued to text her and reached out to a mutual friend to find out if Marta was at here. Upon confirming her location, he decided to act. At 10:42 p.m., Marta left her friend's house, walking alone along Wood Street towards Rockingham Road. Security footage showed her walking confidently, dressed for a night out and carrying a small bag. However, just a few minutes later, around 10:45 p.m., cameras revealed Powell leaving his rented room and heading towards Bath Road, intentionally moving to intersect her path. Powell was recorded leaving his home on Wood Street to find Marta, as noted by Northamptonshire police based on footage from near Wilson Terrace. The video showed a struggle between them. Marta appeared to be walking normally at first but then seemed to resist when Powell grabbed her arm. She stumbled and briefly fell, coughing and unsteady on her feet. Audio from a Ring doorbell captured her labored coughs along with Powell's cold command, "Come on, not far now. Can you hear me?" He was seen forcefully guiding her, at one point lifting her in a bear hug as she struggled to walk. By 10:56 p.m., the low-quality footage showed them entering his house, and that was the last time anyone but Powell saw Marta alive. Inside that room, the situation became increasingly unclear, but Powell's interactions with Marta's phone revealed important information. At 11:01 p.m., just 5 minutes after they arrived, Powell took a photo of Marta lying on the floor. It's uncertain if she was already injured at that time. Approximately 90 minutes later, around 12:30 a.m. on October 16th, he captured images of messages between Marta and her new boyfriend on her phone that confirmed her new relationship. Powell's fixation on Marta's new life, especially her relationship with her new boyfriend, drove his actions. He didn't just spy on her, he went further by using Marta's phone to send messages in an effort to hide his involvement. He texted her friends and family, imitating her writing style to create the illusion that she was still alive. One particular message sent to her family was noticeably formal, unlike Marta's usual warm and casual tone, which raised suspicions. These messages were part of Powell's strategy to delay any suspicion and buy himself time while he remained in the room with Marta's body for nearly 4 days. Marta was last seen alive at 10:56 p.m. on October 15th, when she entered Powell's room. Detectives suspect she died shortly after, likely before midnight, based on a photo Powell took at 11:01 p.m. and the extent of her 32 stab wounds. The injuries to her neck were determined to be the cause of death in the autopsy. The following day, he used Marta's phone to send messages to her male contacts, pretending to be her and attempting to entice them into intimate encounters. On October 17th, just 2 days after Marta's death, surveillance cameras captured him casually walking to a nearby shop to buy 6 cans of beer and a soft drink before returning to his room. He showed no signs of grief, seamlessly blending into the daily life of Kettering while Marta's body lay covered in a blood-stained duvet. This footage was incriminating, revealing a man capable not only of murder but also of continuing his life as if nothing had happened. Powell was arrested on October 21st after his condition stabilized. He faced murder charges, and the evidence against him, CCTV footage, phone records, and forensic analysis, was substantial. Prosecutors presented his motive as jealousy and an inability to accept Marta's new life. He had expressed to friends that he couldn't bear the thought of anyone else being intimate with her, a feeling that ultimately led to his final act. By March 3, 2022, when Powell Kmialecki appeared in Northampton Crown Court and confessed to murdering Marta, the case had already captured the attention of the Kettering community and beyond. His guilty plea eliminated the need for a lengthy trial, which spared Marta's family from the pain of recounting every detail in court. The focus then shifted to a sentencing hearing on September 6, 2023, aimed at determining Powell's punishment and allowing Marta's loved ones to express their grief. Marta's brother and sister-in-law sat in the gallery, visibly heartbroken as they awaited the verdict on the punishment Powell would face for taking her life. The prosecution, represented by Northamptonshire Police and the Crown Prosecution Service, presented a strong argument for a tough sentence. They claimed that Powell's actions were not just a momentary impulse but rather the result of an ongoing pattern of control and obsession. They highlighted the 7 defensive wounds on Marta's right hand as evidence that she fought for her life. The prosecution also referenced Powell's history of domestic abuse, mentioning incidents from August 2020, Easter 2021, and September 2021 to illustrate his increasing aggression. In 2020, he confronted Marta at her workplace on Rockingham Road about her connections with other men, forcibly took her phone to search for evidence of infidelity, then punched her multiple times, resulting in bruises on her back and face, along with a cut lip. Although the police were contacted and Marta initially gave a statement, she later retracted it. Powell offered an apology to his wife through a community resolution process. Marta left him in September that year, but the harassment persisted with continued phone calls and messages. In Easter 2021, he became aggressive during a family party, pushing her. 3 months before her death, he found Marta at the pub, grabbed her arm, and threatened her. The next month, he was reported for harassment. Marta lived in constant fear, telling friends that she was afraid Powell might kill her. Despite her efforts to escape, like moving out, planning to divorce him in Poland, and pleading with him to leave her alone. He continued to stalk and manipulate her, even sending deceptive texts from her phone to avoid raising suspicion. The prosecution highlighted Powell's lack of remorse, noting that he remained with Marta's body for almost 4 days. Powell initially denied his history of abuse while attempting to manipulate the court proceedings. They urged for a life sentence with a lengthy minimum term, arguing that Powell's actions deserved no mercy. On the other hand, Powell's defense team had limited options due to his guilty plea and the strong evidence against him. With the help of an interpreter, they acknowledged the seriousness of his crime but requested a shorter minimum term. They claimed that Powell's actions were impulsive, driven by emotional distress from his divorce and Marta's new relationship. The defense argued that he was deeply affected by the breakup, citing his self-inflicted wounds as signs of remorse or mental anguish. They contended that, although the attack was horrific, it was not premeditated and that Powell's guilty plea had spared the family from a trial. However, these arguments were weak compared to the prosecution's evidence of Powell's calculated stalking and the brutality of the attack. On September 6, 2023, Judge Herbert announced the verdict. Powell Kmielewski was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 18 years and 4 months. The judge directly addressed Powell, stating, "It was a prolonged and violent attack driven entirely by anger and jealousy." He stressed Marta's fear, noting, "The evidence clearly shows that Marta did not feel safe with you and feared you might kill her." The judge cautioned that Powell might never be released, as his eligibility for parole would be based on the parole board's evaluation of his risk to the public. This means that at 40 years old, Powell would be at least 58 before he could apply for parole, reflecting the serious nature of his crime. Marta's family felt the deep impact of the case. Her brother and sister-in-law, who were present at the sentencing, shared a moving statement through Northamptonshire police, expressing that no sentence could alleviate their suffering. However, they found a small sense of closure in knowing that Powell was held accountable for his actions. Marta Kmielewski's life, marked by warmth, resilience, and a pursuit of freedom, was tragically cut short by Powell Kmielewski's jealousy and violence, leaving her family and the Kettering community in profound grief. The sentencing of Powell to life imprisonment with a minimum of 18 years and 4 months brought a measure of justice, though it could never fill the void left by Marta's absence. Her story serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of domestic abuse and the strength of those who fight for their independence, ensuring her memory endures as a call for awareness and change. It was a regular afternoon at Danvers's high school. Most students had already left, and the hallways were quiet. But inside a second-floor bathroom, something terrible was happening. A well-loved teacher had just finished her last class of the day. She had no idea that one of her students was watching her. Minutes later, security cameras caught something strange, him walking out with his hood up and hands covered in blood. He moved through the school as if nothing had happened, casually talking to classmates, grabbing his things, and disappearing into the night. No one knew the dark secret he had just left behind, not yet. Philip Chisholm was born on January 21, 1999, in Tennessee. From a young age, he showed a keen interest in sports, and by the time he entered high school, he had already made a name for himself as a talented soccer player. His skills on the field were undeniable. In 2012, his teammates credited him as the driving force behind their championship win in the league. To those around him, Philip seemed like a friendly yet reserved young man. No one suspected that beneath his quiet demeanor, he was battling deep personal struggles. Philip's home life was far from stable. His father, a former military officer, had succumbed to alcoholism and frequently subjected him to both physical and emotional abuse. Heated arguments with his wife, Diana Chisholm, were a regular occurrence. By the fall of 2013, the tension had reached a breaking point. They decided to separate. Philip was uprooted from the life he knew and moved with his mother to a small town in Massachusetts, while his father relocated to Florida. As part of their divorce agreement, his father was permitted only limited visitation with Philip. Practically overnight, his world had changed completely. Adjusting to a new environment proved difficult for Philip. Already introverted, he struggled to find his place at his new school. Socializing didn't come easily to him, but over time, he began to open up. He gradually integrated into school life, even trying out for the basketball team. Though he made friends, he was selective about whom he spent time with, limiting his conversations in class to only a few people he deemed trustworthy. He stayed away from alcohol and banned substance, never drawing much attention to himself. However, beneath the surface, trouble was brewing. Philip found academics particularly challenging. Rather than engaging with his lessons, he often retreated into his own world, sketching in his notebook and listening to music instead of paying attention in class. It was during this time that Colleen Ritzer, one of the most beloved teachers at the school, noticed this new student. Known for her ability to connect with students, Colleen had dreamed of becoming a teacher from a young age. Excelling in mathematics, she pursued it as her career, earning her degree in mathematics with a specialization in secondary education, and began teaching 8th grade math that same year. Her dedication to her students was unmistakable. She frequently stayed after school to offer extra help and used social media to engage with them. When Philip arrived at the school, Colleen quickly noticed his academic struggles. Understanding that he was going through a rough time, she saw potential in him and believed he just needed some guidance to get back on track. However, unlike most of his classmates, Philip showed no interest in her efforts. On the morning of October 22, 2013, Philip arrived at Danvers's high school carrying multiple bags. Inside them were gloves, a change of clothes, a mask, and a box cutter, items that had nothing to do with schoolwork. Later that day, he attended Colleen's class. When the lesson was over, she approached him, offering to stay after class to help him prepare for an upcoming test. Philip's reaction was anything but appreciative. Instead, he erupted into an angry outburst. Colleen attempted to calm him down, but he stormed off. At around 3 p.m., Colleen went to the bathroom, unaware that Philip was closely following her. By that time, most students had left the school. Philip quietly entered the bathroom wearing gloves and holding a box cutter. Suddenly, he attacked Colleen, covering her mouth with a cloth to silence her. He overpowered her and stabbed her at least 16 times. The assault was interrupted when another student entered the bathroom. She saw Philip but assumed he was just changing for soccer practice, not realizing the violence happening nearby. She left without raising an alarm, unknowingly encountering a murderer. Then, Philip left the bathroom with his hood up and one hand covered in blood. He headed toward the school parking lot with a sinister plan to find a dumpster to dispose of the body. On his way, he casually greeted several friends, who had no idea about the horrific crime he had just committed. Soon after, he changed out of his clothes, putting on a white t-shirt and a red hoodie. With a recycling bin in hand, he returned to the bathroom. This time, he came out, made his way to the elevator and hiding his teacher's lifeless body. After leaving the school, Philip took the recycling bin to a secluded wooded area. There, he disguised Colleen's body with a tree branch and covered her remains with dry leaves. He also left a vague note that said, "I hate everyone." Acting normally, he returned to the school. Although his messy appearance should have raised concern, no one noticed anything unusual, allowing him to collect his belongings from his locker and leave without any interruptions. Philip thought he had gotten away with the perfect crime, but he was very wrong. Hours later, his mother started to worry when she realized he was missing. She went to the nearest police station to file a missing person report. At the same time, his soccer teammates noticed he wasn't at practice and began to search for him, becoming increasingly anxious. The police responded quickly and asked Philip's phone provider to track his last known location. The signal was traced to the area near Hollywood Hits Theater. Investigators went there and found that he had bought a movie ticket before disappearing. Shortly after that, his phone went offline at 9 p.m. The principal of Danvers High School emailed staff about Philip's disappearance. Shortly after, a math teacher called her with worrying news. Colleen Ritzer's parents also reported that she did not return home. This was particularly concerning because Philip had been in Colleen's last class that day, raising fears that they may have been together before they both disappeared. Colleen's parents were desperately trying to contact her, but their calls went unanswered. By around 11 p.m., they formally reported her missing. Police tracked Colleen's phone to the school area, noting the coincidence of two missing persons from the same school. This led them to investigate further. Their investigation took a troubling turn when they found Colleen's car still parked at the school, indicating something was wrong. While searching the building, they examined the second-floor bathroom and encountered a horrifying scene. Bloodstains covered the area, and Colleen's purse was left behind. A blood-spattered recycling bin was also found in the corner. Following this grim evidence, officers searched the woods behind the school and discovered blood-soaked clothing that belonged to Colleen. This evidence confirmed that a serious crime had occurred. Authorities quickly began questioning students and staff in hopes of finding witnesses. A student came forward to share an unsettling incident he had overheard between Philip and Colleen while he was organizing his locker. He noticed Philip was raising his voice at Colleen, who was trying to calm him down. The student thought Philip's anger might have been triggered by Colleen's question about his family, which unintentionally reminded him of his parents' divorce. Even though Colleen quickly moved on to a different topic, Philip continued to seem upset and began muttering to himself. The student felt that something was wrong but never thought Philip could become violent. A female student came forward with important information. She told investigators she saw the back of a person who appeared to be changing clothes. The person's rear end was exposed, with clothes piled on the floor in the bathroom that afternoon. Additionally, a mother who was picking up her child around 3:30 p.m. reported seeing Philip quickly leaving the school. This evidence suggested that something had occurred between Philip and Colleen. Detectives then reviewed the school's surveillance footage to understand the timeline of events leading up to their disappearances. The footage revealed alarming details. At 7:45 a.m., Philip arrived at school carrying several bags, which he stored in his locker. Then, at 2:54 p.m., Colleen was seen leaving a classroom and heading towards the second-floor bathroom. Just a minute later, Philip appeared in the hallway, watching her closely before briefly returning to the classroom. Moments after that, he came back into view with his hood up and followed her into the bathroom while putting on gloves. At 3:06 p.m., a female student was seen entering the bathroom and quickly exiting moments later. At 3:07 p.m., Philip left the bathroom with his hood up and walked to the parking lot. He returned 2 minutes later, now wearing a white t-shirt. After a few minutes, he was spotted again, this time in a red hoodie. At 3:16 p.m., he went back into the bathroom with a recycling bin. By 3:22 p.m., security footage showed him wearing a ski mask as he pushed the bin into the elevator. Shortly after, he was seen dragging it outside toward the student parking lot. Later that evening, Philip returned to the school, entered the bathroom again, and changed clothes. This time, he was barefoot, wearing a black hoodie. When investigators finished reviewing the footage, they were certain of one thing: Colleen had entered the bathroom but did not come out. In contrast, Philip had repeatedly entered and exited, changing his clothes each time and pushing a large bin on one occasion. Coupled with the blood evidence found in the bathroom, the conclusion was clear: Colleen had been murdered, and Philip was their main suspect. Law enforcement quickly began searching for Philip, who was still missing. They checked security footage from the school and nearby streets to see if they could find any signs of his movements. Simultaneously, they monitored Colleen Ritzer's bank account since Philip had stolen her wallet along with her credit cards, indicating he might have already used them. Their suspicions were confirmed when they found that Colleen's card had been used to buy a burger, fries, and a drink. A movie ticket was also purchased, and location data from Philip's phone showed he was at the theater shortly after the crime occurred. While police worked to find him, an unexpected turn of events happened. Around 2:30 a.m. on October 23rd, an officer in a nearby town saw a young man walking along the highway at the intersection of Route 1, North and Salem Road. It was Philip, aimlessly wandering without a clear direction. The officer recognized him from the missing person alert and stopped to ask questions. During a search, the officer found Colleen Ritzer's credit card and driver's license in Philip's possession. Additionally, his pants still had blood stains on them. He was promptly taken into custody and brought to the local police station. When officers searched Philip's backpack, they discovered Colleen's purse, her underwear, and a box cutter with dried blood on it. Alarmingly, There were also traces of semen and blood on Philip's own underwear. When interrogated about the blood, Philip coldly remarked, "It's from the girl," referring to Colleen, his teacher. He showed no remorse and proceeded to inform the police that her body was buried in the woods. At 3 a.m., a team of officers went to the wooded area behind Danvers High School. After searching for some time, they noticed a pile of leaves and debris. One officer spotted a thumb with pink nail polish sticking out from the leaves. When they removed the foliage, they were met with a horrifying scene. Colleen's lifeless body was lying on her back, her throat cut, and a tree branch had violated her remains. Her face and body showed signs of severe trauma. Nearby, officers found a pair of blood-soaked white gloves and a handwritten note that stated, "I hate everyone." Colleen's remains were quickly taken for forensic examination. The autopsy revealed she had suffered 16 stab wounds and had been abuse-assaulted twice. Philip was immediately charged with aggravated assault, armed robbery, and first-degree murder. He was held without bail. That morning, on October 23rd, police visited Philip's mother at her new apartment, which she had moved into after leaving Tennessee due to her divorce. She appeared very upset and acknowledged that the separation had been hard for both her and Philip. Later, through his attorney, she released a statement offering her condolences to Colleen's family. In contrast, Philip's uncle took a different view. He suggested that something must have triggered his nephew's actions, arguing that teenagers can be quick to anger, and noted that Philip was only 14 years old. He characterized Philip as a well-behaved child from a good family, seemingly minimizing the seriousness of the situation. Philip's former soccer coach shared similar feelings, saying he wanted to learn the full story before judging the teenager. Meanwhile, a student, Rania Ridui, found it hard to comprehend the tragedy. She couldn't understand why anyone would hurt Colleen, who she described as kind and caring. Colleen's family was heartbroken and in deep mourning. On October 28, 2013, the community came together to pay their respects at her funeral at St. Augustine Church. The service was very emotional and attended by nearly 1,000 people, including 400 of Colleen's students from Danvers High School, many of whom wore pink, her favorite color. The entrance to the church was decorated with pink flowers, symbolizing the love and admiration she inspired in those who knew her. Colleen's cousin spoke passionately about the large turnout at Colleen's funeral, which highlighted the significant impact she had on her community. She noted that even though Colleen had a brief life, she made a lasting impression on education, inspiring many students with her dedication and love for teaching. She also emphasized Colleen's strong bond with her siblings, her commitment to being a supportive friend and mentor. With deep sorrow and respect, Colleen's cousin described Colleen as the ideal person any parent would wish for their child to become. The Reverend provided words of comfort, encouraging attendees to focus on the meaningful life Colleen led rather than the tragic way it ended. His message resonated with those grieving, reminding them to celebrate the positivity Colleen brought to the world. Months later, at a juvenile detention center in Boston, Philip committed another crime. On June 2, 2014, he entered a staff locker room bathroom and tried to strangle a 29-year-old medical staff member and attack her with a pencil. It took several employees to restrain him while he screamed threats, including, "I'm going to kill all of you." Although he didn't succeed in killing her, she was left seriously injured. A new case was opened against him, but he was still facing charges for the murder of Colleen Ritzer before going to trial for this attack. Philip's defense attorney admitted that he had killed the teacher but argued that he should not be held criminally responsible. She claimed he was experiencing a psychotic episode and suffering from severe mental illness at the time of the murder, even stating that he had heard voices beforehand. The prosecutor strongly disagreed, asserting that Philip did not have any mental illness and presented surveillance footage as evidence. The videos showed him carefully following Colleen into the bathroom, attacking her, and then coldly placing her body into a recycling bin before wheeling it outside. The prosecutor also highlighted that after the murder, Philip casually greeted friends, ate a meal, and watched a movie while carrying evidence of his crime in his backpack. After considering the prosecution's argument, the court rejected the defense's claim of criminal insanity, ruling that Philip was mentally competent to stand trial. Since the minimum age for criminal prosecution in the United States is 14, he could be tried as an adult. On December 15, 2015, a jury found Philip guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated assault, and armed robbery. As the judge read the verdict, Philip stood silently, his hands cuffed and his expression blank. Colleen's mother, heartbroken by his lack of remorse, declared that Philip was truly evil and beyond rehabilitation. Their family will never get a second chance with Colleen, and he shouldn't get one either, she said. Despite these emotional statements, Philip showed no reaction. He did not flinch or show any empathy or regret for the life he had taken or the family he had devastated. On February 26, 2016, despite the defense team arguing that Philip was mentally ill, he was convicted of killing Colleen Ritzer and sentenced to 40 to 60 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 40 years, a sentence that Colleen's family felt was not harsh enough. However, this was not his last sentencing. On April 26, 2024, a decade later, he faced trial again for attempting to murder a medical worker at the Boston Juvenile Facility. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense as his attorney declared that Philip wanted to take full responsibility and resolve the case quickly. Despite this, it was evident to everyone that he lacked genuine remorse. The medical worker he attacked described him as a monster and a remorseless killer. She recounted the terrifying incident, stating that he intended to kill her. During her testimony, she revealed that his face still haunted her as a constant reminder of the trauma he caused. She pleaded with the court to keep Philip in prison for life, so no one else would suffer at his hands. Ultimately, the judge sentenced Philip to an additional 17 to 20 years for the attack, to be served concurrently with his original sentence for Colleen's murder. To this day, Philip remains in prison, serving time for the crimes he committed against two women who only tried to help him, but were met with unimaginable violence instead. Colleen's family chose to celebrate her memory instead of focusing on their sorrow after her tragic death. 1 year following her murder, they created a scholarship in her honor. In a public statement, they remembered Colleen as a kind and caring young woman whose love for teaching defined her life. They take comfort in knowing that her legacy lives on. Many students who have received the scholarship are pursuing teaching careers, inspired by Colleen's dedication and passion for education. Although she is no longer, her influence remains strong in the classrooms and hearts of those who knew her. In October 2024, Chisholm's attorneys appealed to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, arguing that brain scan evidence of mental illness had been wrongly excluded. On February 25, 2025, the SJC denied a new trial, upholding Chisholm's conviction and 40-year parole. Ritzer's family expressed relief, stating the ruling allowed them to grieve without appeal uncertainties. The brutal murder of Colleen Ritzer at Danvers High School left an indelible scar on her family, students, and community, shattering the illusion of safety in a place meant for learning. Yet, from this tragedy, Colleen's radiant legacy endures through the scholarship bearing her name, inspiring future educators to carry forward her passion and kindness. Philip Chisholm, whose cold indifference and violent acts stole a beloved teacher's life, remains behind bars, his 2025 appeal denial ensuring accountability for his crimes. As Danvers continues to heal, the memory of Colleen, her infectious smile, unwavering dedication, and boundless compassion, lives on, a beacon of light that no darkness can extinguish. Lauren and William Heaven adopted a newborn baby girl named Erin in the summer of 1994. From the start, Erin became a cherished member of the family, receiving the same love and care as their biological children. Over the years, she forged a strong bond with her foster sisters, creating a close-knit family that offered mutual support and encouragement. The Heaven family felt that Erin had something special and knew she was meant to be a part of their family. Growing up, Erin was shy and reserved, often struggling to connect with others. However, she found comfort in her passion for horses. From a young age, Erin developed a natural affinity for animals, and riding allowed her to express her true self. The East Tennessee Riding Club became a refuge for her, a place to escape life's pressures. At the riding club, Erin discovered a sense of belonging and friendship. The horses created a supportive environment where she could explore her feelings and build her inner strength. She spent countless hours in the stables, grooming and riding, finding peace in the equestrian lifestyle. Lauren had strict rules for her daughters, especially regarding dating. When Erin met Jonathan Corwin, she realized he was someone special, kind, respectful, and genuinely interested in her. Knowing her parents' strict guidelines, Erin hesitated to introduce Jonathan to the family. After careful thought, she decided to share her parents' expectations with him, knowing that their approval would be necessary if they were to pursue a relationship. Jonathan respected the importance of Erin's family values and took the initiative to ask Lauren and William for permission to date her. They were pleasantly surprised by his approach, appreciating his willingness to honor their expectations and recognize the significance of family. Over time, he became an important part of their lives, respecting their traditions and supporting them during tough times. He swiftly gained their trust and affection. As his relationship with Erin deepened, they officially became a couple, and it felt like he was more than just her boyfriend. He was now part of the family. Jonathan blended in well with the Heaven sisters, spending quality time with them and creating lasting memories. After graduating high school, he chose to enlist in the Marines out of a strong sense of duty. On Erin's 18th birthday, he surprised her with a proposal. Nervous but excited, he knelt down and posed the question he had been eager to ask. Erin's face lit up with joy as she eagerly exclaimed, "Yes." Lauren and William were thrilled for their daughter, confident in the strength of her relationship with Jonathan and believing he was the right choice for her. However, they were also aware of the sacrifices and challenges that come with being a military spouse. They worried about their daughter, knowing there would be times when she would be away from her family and that they would miss her deeply. Erin and Jonathan got married in Las Vegas after the Marine Corps Ball. After Jonathan finished basic training, he was stationed at the 29 Palms Marine Base in California. In 2013, while there, Erin and Jonathan learned they were expecting their first child. Sadly, just a few months later, they lost the baby. The news was devastating for both of them, particularly for Erin. During this difficult time, Jonathan did his best to support and comfort her. 4 months later, Erin took a pregnancy test and was overjoyed to find out it was positive. Eager to share the news, she decided to wait for her mother Lauren's visit to California in June, believing it would be more special to see her reaction in person. Along with announcing her pregnancy, Erin and Lauren planned to visit attractions in San Diego, such as SeaWorld and the zoo, looking forward to spending quality time together. They also intended to explore hiking trails in Joshua Tree National Park during Lauren's visit. Erin planned to go to the park on June 28th. Before leaving, she said goodbye to Jonathan, telling him that she loved him. Jonathan expected Erin to return by late afternoon, but as the hours passed without her home, he grew worried. He called her more than 50 times, but there was no response. The next morning, June 29th, Jonathan reached out to Lauren in Tennessee, explaining that Erin hadn't come home the previous day. Lauren was immediately concerned, especially given Erin's pregnancy and the heat. Lauren feared that Erin might be lost in the park and was worried about how much water she had with her. Jonathan then contacted the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department to report his wife as missing, providing details about Erin's last known location and asking for help in finding her. The detective assigned to the case considered the possibility that Erin had driven to Tennessee to see her mother, Lauren, but Lauren firmly rejected this idea, noting that Erin disliked driving and had a poor sense of direction. To search for Erin, Jonathan and his Marine friends went to Joshua Tree National Park, a vast 800,000-acre area of rugged desert terrain. This challenging environment, combined with the intense heat of late June, made the search even harder. As the detective looked into Erin's disappearance, he began to explore the state of Erin and Jonathan's marriage. Although they seemed like an ideal couple, he quickly found that things were not as they appeared. In reality, their marriage had been under strain since the loss of their baby. Erin's mental health had suffered greatly, leading her into a deep depression that impacted every aspect of her life, including her relationship with Jonathan. The investigation also revealed that they were dealing with financial difficulties. They were burdened by debt, which added to the tension in their marriage. Throughout the investigation, the detective discovered that Aaron had formed a close friendship with Christopher and Nicole Lee. Christopher, like Jonathan, was a Marine, which created an initial bond. Additionally, Aaron and Nicole shared a love for horses, bringing them even closer together. Nicole introduced Aaron to White Rock Horse Rescue Ranch, about 45 minutes from their military base in 29 Palms. This ranch offered Aaron a chance to escape her problems and find peace in a serene environment. As Aaron's relationship with Jonathan worsened, she became increasingly attached to Christopher. The detective revealed that Christopher, having recently returned from Afghanistan, also faced personal struggles. Their shared experiences and emotional connections through their love of horses created a strong bond. Aaron's affection for Christopher's 6-year-old daughter, Liberty, further deepened their relationship. She often babysat Liberty, providing a nurturing atmosphere that strengthened her ties to Christopher and her family. Aaron and Christopher spent hours working together at the horse ranch, and initially, it seemed innocent. However, over time, they developed a romantic connection, which caught the attention of Nicole, Christopher's wife. She informed Jonathan, Aaron's husband, that she suspected an affair between Aaron and Christopher. Jonathan was devastated to hear that Aaron had been unfaithful. Despite this betrayal, he loved Aaron deeply and wanted to work on their marriage. Consequently, Aaron ended her relationship with Christopher and reconciled with Jonathan. However, a deeper investigation into Aaron's disappearance revealed a different story. Detectives found evidence that Aaron and Christopher were still involved romantically. This information came from Aaron's close friend, Jessica, who mentioned that on the day Aaron vanished, she had excitedly talked about a special trip with Christopher. Aaron hinted to Jessica that Christopher might propose, despite being married to Jonathan and pregnant with his child. The most shocking detail was when Jessica revealed that Aaron had doubts about who the biological father of her unborn baby was. This revelation broke Jonathan's heart, especially when detectives informed him that Aaron had planned to meet Christopher on the day she disappeared. The news left Jonathan feeling sad and anxious, as he was now considered a potential suspect in her disappearance. He firmly denied any involvement, maintaining his innocence. On June 28, the day Aaron went missing, a woman driving near the entrance to Joshua Tree Park noticed a car parked by the roadside. As she drove past, she saw that the car was still there. Suspicious, she took several photos of the vehicle to document potential evidence. 2 days later, on June 30th, another individual who also noticed the car parked there reported it to the police. When officers arrived, they found that the car was registered to Aaron. The woman who took photos of the car became an important witness in the case. She shared the images with detectives, hoping they could aid the investigation. The detectives focused on the location where Aaron's car was parked at the entrance to Joshua Tree Park. While examining the area, they found a set of shoe prints that formed the loop from the driver's side door to some visible tire tracks. This led them to believe that Aaron had parked her car and then got into another vehicle before she disappeared. Christopher, a person of interest, initially claimed he didn't know Aaron well. However, detectives were aware of their extramarital affair. When confronted about his statements, Christopher said he didn't see it as necessary to share details with the police, thinking it wasn't relevant. Eventually, he admitted to having a romantic relationship with Aaron. Despite his claims, the detectives were skeptical and informed him they had evidence showing Aaron went to Joshua Tree National Park to meet him on the day she disappeared. Christopher acknowledged that they had talked about running away together but insisted he was never serious, citing his love for his 6-year-old daughter, Liberty, and stating that he would never abandon her. Christopher initially denied inviting Aaron to the park with him, claiming that she had only overheard him discussing plans to visit the area. He tried to suggest that she had asked to go along. With no solid evidence against him, detectives bluffingly told him that the tire tracks found at the park matched his vehicle, suggesting he had met Aaron there. This made Christopher nervous, and he confessed that he might have entered the area where Aaron had parked her car, but he claimed he never saw her on the day she vanished. The detectives shifted their attention to the White Rock Horse Rescue Ranch, where Aaron often volunteered to care for horses. They interviewed the ranch owner, who revealed that on the day Aaron disappeared, Christopher's wife, Nicole, had sent a text stating that Christopher wouldn't be at work because he was sick. The following morning, when Christopher and Nicole returned to the ranch, they appeared tense as news of Aaron's disappearance spread. The owner also mentioned that Nicole believed Aaron was pretending to be missing to gain attention. During the investigation, detectives learned that Christopher and his family were planning to move back to Alaska soon, as he was nearing the end of his military service. The ranch owner had allowed Christopher and Nicole to borrow her SUV for transporting their belongings and permitted the detectives to search the vehicle. Inside the SUV, investigators found a potato launcher, which is considered an illegal weapon in California. This discovery led to Christopher's arrest, although he was released on bail on July 5, 2014. A week later, he was discharged from the Marines. Meanwhile, the search for Aaron continued in San Bernardino County. Aaron's husband, Jonathan, passed a polygraph test, indicating he was truthful and not a suspect. At this stage of the investigation, detectives believed that Christopher had lured Aaron to Joshua Tree National Park, where he killed her and disposed of her body in one of the shafts. A breakthrough came when a friend who had accompanied Christopher on a scouting trip provided detectives with photographs from their outing. Using these photos, detectives engaged a cave expert to pinpoint where they were taken in the Mojave Desert. The expert identified the location as the Rose Peru mine. However, since there are multiple mines in the area, Aaron's remains could be in any of them. Determined to find Aaron, a large-scale search of the Rose Peru mine commenced, lasting several weeks as detectives meticulously searched the desert for clues. Despite their extensive efforts, the search did not yield any positive results. Throughout this process, the detectives remained hopeful for closure and justice for Aaron. On August 14, 2014, while searching for a missing woman, a member of the San Bernardino Cave Rescue Team noticed a strong smell of gas coming from a mine. The team quickly sent someone down the mine shaft to investigate. Inside, they found the human leg, prompting them to swiftly recover the body. Along with the body, they collected several pieces of evidence, including a makeshift torch made from a skirt, a propane tank, and a bottle of Sprite, which were important for the investigation. The body was then taken to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. The examination revealed that the remains were those of Aaron Corwin. Further investigation showed that she had a garrote wire around her neck, indicating she had been strangled. A garrote is designed to restrict airflow by putting pressure on the throat or windpipe and usually consists of a handle and a flexible wire. Based on the evidence found at the scene, an arrest warrant was issued for Christopher Lee, charging him with first-degree murder in connection with Aaron's disappearance and death. During the trial, multiple witnesses testified that Christopher had expressed interest in how to dispose of a body in the weeks before Aaron went missing. Their testimonies bolstered the prosecution's case against him. One of his friends recalled seeing a white propane tank in his car that was similar to the one found with Aaron's body. When asked about the propane tank, he allegedly stated that he planned to blow up a mine. A close friend of Aaron testified that Aaron was in love with Christopher and intended to leave her husband, Jonathan, for him. On the day Aaron disappeared, she was excited about a special trip to Joshua Tree National Park with Christopher. During Christopher's trial, a DNA expert from the crime lab testified about evidence found at the scene. The expert revealed that the green t-shirt, which was used to make a homemade torch found near Aaron's body in the mine, had Christopher's DNA on it. Additionally, DNA from both Aaron and Christopher was found on a swab taken from the mouth of a Sprite bottle discovered beside Aaron's body. The prosecution's theory in Aaron's murder case was that Christopher took her to Joshua Tree National Park under the pretense of a romantic getaway but with harmful intentions. They claimed that Christopher met Aaron at the park entrance and convinced her to get into his car. Instead of driving her to scenic spots or hiking trails, he allegedly took her to the Rose Peru mine. There, he is accused of strangling her with a garrote and then disposing of her body in the mine shaft. To eliminate any evidence linking him to the crime, he attempted to blow up the mine using a homemade torch made from his t-shirt and a propane tank. His goal was to destroy Aaron's body and any evidence against him. However, for unknown reasons, he ultimately did not carry out the explosion. Christopher testified in his own defense, explaining to the jury that he had always intended to leave the United States Marine Corps by June 2014 to start a new chapter in his life. He also mentioned that he planned to break up with Aaron and move to Alaska with his wife and daughter. On June 28, he had organized a hunting trip with Aaron, hoping it would provide an opportunity for an open conversation. Christopher picked Aaron up at the entrance of the park and drove her to the Rose Peru mine, a remote area known for its beauty. However, Aaron expressed concerns about the location's safety and decided to stay in the car while Christopher unloaded his supplies. Once back at the car, where Aaron was listening to music, they began to talk. Christopher told Aaron about his plans to relocate to Alaska, and she expressed a desire to join him, emphasizing her wish to be part of his daughter's life. However, Christopher held a troubling perspective. He believed that his wife, Nichola, had discovered their daughter was being abused and that Aaron was responsible. While sitting in the car near the mine, he confronted Aaron about whether she had touched his daughter inappropriately. Aaron became visibly nervous and, while stuttering, admitted to the abuse, which deeply upset Christopher and made him determined to protect his daughter. Christopher admitted to the jury that learning of the abuse filled him with anger towards Aaron. Concerned for his daughter's safety, he left the truck to retrieve his garrote, intending to punish Aaron for her actions. He then strangled her to death and dragged her body into the mine shaft to ensure she would not be found. Christopher Lee was found guilty of Aaron Corwin's murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Aaron's husband, Jonathan Corwin, strongly denies Christopher's claim that Aaron abused Christopher and Nicola's daughter. The detectives and prosecutor involved in the case have expressed their disbelief and disgust at these allegations, asserting that anyone who knew Aaron would understand she was incapable of harming that child. Jessica Edens was born on January 22, 1981, in a small suburb of New York State, USA. She came from a large family, with a sister named Diane and two half-brothers, Nathan and Adam. Jessica spent her early years surrounded by loving parents and siblings, with whom she developed warm relationships. She didn't have outstanding academic success but was always creative, dreaming of becoming a photographer. When her parents recognized this passion, they bought her an amateur camera, which she carried everywhere. She took pictures of people, nature, cities, and architecture, anything that caught her attention. Her work was admired and praised. During her teenage years, Jessica actively pursued this passion and mastered the craft. She began to shoot weddings and various events, initially for free, then for a small fee. This allowed her to earn enough money for her own needs, and the idea of building a real business became increasingly appealing. Jessica's personal life was also progressing. She was sociable, active, attractive, and always attracted a lot of attention. On November 19, 2007, she gave birth to a son named Hayden King. Jessica became pregnant during a rapidly developing relationship with a young man, but the love between them faded quickly, and they broke up before Hayden was born. However, Jessica remained optimistic and maintained friendly relations with the child's biological father, allowing him to communicate with Hayden. Jessica was determined to provide everything her child needed, regardless of whether she had a partner or was raising him as a single mother. Fortunately, she did not have to be alone for long. In 2008, Jessica met a man named Benjamin Edens. They quickly found common ground, grew closer, and within a few meetings, they could not imagine their lives without each other. They was in no hurry to officially register their marriage, as both were creative individuals who understood each other well. After a few months, they moved in together, and Jessica began to contemplate having more children. After a while, they officially got married in 2010. Shortly thereafter, they decided to move to a new large house located in a small, cozy town in Easley, South Carolina, which was ideal for a quiet family life. Their family relationships flourished, and Jessica was convinced she had found the man of her dreams, a feeling that was mutual. 2 years later, on July 19, 2012, they welcomed a daughter named Harper Edens. Jessica believes this further strengthens her relationship with Benjamin. He was a wonderful father who spent all his free time with Harper. He also became so close to Hayden that the boy did not suspect Benjamin was not his biological father. By 2017, Hayden was in the 4th grade, while his younger sister Harper was about to start 1st grade in the fall. This was an exciting milestone. From the outside, Jessica's family appeared perfect. She had 2 children, a beloved job, and a husband whom she described to everyone as the best person. Her eldest child was a good student, and the family expected the same from Harper. Jessica's passion for photography thrived, but when she had her daughter, she decided to take a break and become a housewife, stepping back from her small but successful photo business. However, as Harper grew more independent, Jessica returned to attending various events to conduct professional photography. To simplify her client search, she created a website where she introduced herself as a photographer from Greenville. Jessica described her life as perfect, but, as often happens, things were exaggerated. Behind the facade of love and understanding, difficulties began to arise in the marriage. Over time, Benjamin's feelings cooled, and tension accumulated between them. Jessica wanted to understand what was happening as she began to notice uncharacteristic behaviors in her husband. He would come home from work, immediately run into the shower without even saying hello to his wife and children, as if he were trying to hide something. More and more often, he stayed at work much longer than his shift lasted, citing overtime and global projects that no one could confirm. He began to actively engage in sports, carefully monitored his appearance, and switched to healthy eating. All this could look like ordinary healthy habits that people develop with age, but not with Jessica. She began to suspect Benjamin of cheating. Quickly, a suitable candidate for an affair appeared. A young, attractive woman had recently started at her husband's workplace. This woman's name was Meredith Rahm. She was born on October 29, 1988, in Collierville, Tennessee. In Jessica's opinion, it was on Meredith that her husband had set his eyes. In the early years of Meredith's life, her parents divorced, and her mother quickly found a new man and remarried, so Meredith had a stepfather named Carlton Chambers. He was a worthy person and became like a second father to her. The family in which she grew up was friendly and loving. Meredith had a younger sister named Brittany Rowell. She dedicated herself to her studies from an early age and was focused on career success. She studied well and was creative, like Jessica, but family and children were of little interest to her. In 2009, she graduated from the University of Memphis with a bachelor's degree in international business. After gaining some necessary experience, she moved to Greenville. Meredith was very independent and self-confident, which immediately caught Benjamin's eye. By the time they met, Meredith had started working at the same company as Benjamin. In fact, Jessica's suspicions were justified. Immediately after meeting Meredith, her husband became attracted to her. Their feelings come from both sides. They started dating in secret, and their affair continued for a year. Now, Benjamin finally realized that he wanted to be with his young mistress and wanted to break up with Jessica, but he didn't know how to approach the issue. He was afraid of offending his wife and wanted to avoid the difficulties of the divorce process. For a long time, Benjamin was torn between his family and his mistress. His wife's suspicions only aggravated the situation. The more accusations she made, the more inevitable the breakup felt, which provoked constant quarrels. Jessica did not trust her husband and wanted to find out what was going on. He tried to distance himself, but this could not go on forever. It was time to tell the truth, but Benjamin could not bring himself to do it. Instead of confessing, he decided to move out on far-fetched grounds, citing constant pressure from his wife. On April 11, 2017, Benjamin packed his things and moved from the shared family home to a rented apartment. At least that is what he initially told his wife. Jessica kept hoping that these were only temporary difficulties that many people experience, and that their marriage would be saved. She believed she could convince her husband to return to her and their children. Benjamin tried to avoid the topic of separation altogether, reluctantly answered calls and messages, which only offended her more. The betrayal was of such a magnitude that she could not forgive it. She was angry, and her hopes for a family reunion were shattered. But most of all, she was furious that Benjamin simply ignored her. As the persecution began, Jessica spread various damaging facts about Meredith on all social networks and on any sites where she could post information, exposing her as the homewrecker and her husband as a cheater. Jessica continued to communicate regularly with Benjamin, trying to win him back. Instead, he finally decided to file for divorce. Telling Jessica this provoked even more anger from her, and she now decided to annoy him as much as possible. She knew how much Benjamin loved their daughter Harper, so she sought sole custody of the girl. He had always been a caring father and loved the children, including Hayden. Therefore, he was against such a decision. Benjamin wanted to maintain the right to communicate with the children. He did not want to sit idly by. He hoped to smooth over the conflict and therefore proposed joint custody. Jessica was adamant. Against this backdrop, a serious custody battle began, and tensions escalated. Realizing that it would not be possible to agree amicably, Benjamin went to court on July 11th. He wanted to gain an advantage and testified under oath that Jessica was using the children as a weapon of revenge. By this point, Jessica had completely prevented meetings and communication between the children with their father, not even allowing contact through social networks and mobile phones. Everything was under her total control. Benjamin was afraid she could go too far. Simultaneously, Jessica intensified her harassment of Benjamin and Meredith. She continued to post not just hateful words toward Meredith on social media but also use graphic photos and other offensive captions. Previously, Jessica had tried to portray Benjamin's mistress as a family destroyer. Now, even more disturbing captions began to appear. She claimed that Meredith would get what she deserved, though she never specified what she meant. Meredith, the target of the harassment, began to fear that all of this could be dangerous. However, Benjamin insisted that Jessica had no history of violence, so he believed the situation would gradually settle down. He tried not to provoke her further, but it had little effect. The situation only worsened. When Jessica learned about the filing of a joint custody application by her husband, she was furious. Benjamin had always been a decent person, a valuable employee who earned a good salary and had no bad habits or addictions, so there were no serious grounds for denying him custody or terminating his contact with the children. He simply wanted to see them. Now that he had received the right to visit, which Jessica could not oppose. Due to the impossibility of taking revenge, she began to come up with more sophisticated ways to annoy him. Every short communication with Benjamin ended in conflicts and accusations. It was even more annoying to her that the mistress would be in contact with the children. During this period, Benjamin and Meredith regularly contacted the police to complain about Jessica's behavior. In particular, Meredith could no longer tolerate the publications that Jessica made about her daily on various social networks. She starts having problems at work when Jessica tries to turn things around her. Benjamin tried to prove that Jessica's behavior was stalking and very disturbing. Worse, he began receiving frightening messages from Jessica, all concerning the children. It seemed she was trying to intimidate him with ambiguous phrases, and he worried that his daughter might be in danger. In July 2017, after a court meeting, he called the police to check on the welfare of the children at Jessica's house. He described the situation in detail. He felt powerless since Jessica still interfered with the meetings, and he did not want to use force, fearing she would use this in court against him to strip him of his joint custody rights. The officers who responded reported that everything was fine, but the anxiety from the threats continued to grow. On July 12th, they discussed joint custody again. All attempts by Jessica to prevent this were unsuccessful, making her even more furious. During the day, Benjamin begins to receive more disturbing messages from his ex-wife. It was obvious to her that there was no legal way to limit the children's communication with their father, so she tried to irritate him further with her frightening messages. Benjamin contacted the police again and asked the patrol officers to go to the family home to check on the children's well-being. When the officers arrived, they again did not see anything suspicious. The report compiled by the patrolman stated that everything was fine, the family seemed normal, Jessica behaved calmly, and her son and daughter were in a good mood while watching a movie when the officers arrived. At that moment, Jessica insisted that Harper call Benjamin, realizing that he had called the police. All of this became part of her insidious plan to expose him as a liar. While the officer was in the house, he discussed the potential resumption of relations with Benjamin. Jessica denied wanting to reconcile, calling him a traitor who had cheated for a whole year. She couldn't forgive him and intended to use this in court to achieve sole custody of their daughter. She didn't want him in the children's lives. While the officer was filling out the report, Jessica began insisting that Benjamin and Meredith were very dangerous people, especially to the children. She claimed to have suffered from their behavior since the divorce process began and insisted that they were trying to portray her in a bad light. Jessica wanted to obtain a restraining order against them. The patrolman informed Jessica that, in order to get a restraining order, she would have to go through the court process after filing a report. After saying goodbye to the officers, she promised to file a statement in person soon, but that was not destined to happen. The next day, while Jessica's family was out of town, she went to her parents' house early in the morning and took a .40 caliber pistol that they used for self-defense. When relatives heard about this, Jessica warned her father about the need for a weapon, and he was not against it. They did not suspect the scale of the persecution that Jessica had arranged. She skillfully lied, making Benjamin look worse and referring to the persecution from him, that the danger emanating from her ex. Jessica claimed that she could not feel calm at home, she was simply afraid to be left alone with her 2 children. They were easily convinced that Benjamin and Meredith posed a threat, including to the children, and that the weapon would help protect them from what she described as extremely harmful communication. All of this sounded plausible, therefore, her parents had no problem with her needing the weapon for a while. Jessica planned to keep the gun in the house while the divorce process was ongoing. Jessica then sent text messages filled with accusations, now targeting everyone who knew Meredith. She managed to find information about the family and friends of Meredith, copying the messages to everyone, then telling them how Meredith had stolen her husband, destroyed her family, and was now trying to take the children. Jessica obtained the phone numbers of at least 5 friends of family members on social media. It seemed she was immersed in this all day, displaying behavior that resembled madness. She even personally called several people, relaying her story over her mobile phone. Some of Jessica's acquaintances became disappointed in her decency, causing real damage to her reputation. Benjamin also received even more terrifying messages. Jessica openly accused and intimidated him, stating that he would not receive anything, he would not gain access to Meredith and the children. Jessica wrote that because of his actions, he would have no chance of getting any of it, as she would not allow him to enjoy life after what he had done. Benjamin was extremely worried about this information and began to send Jessica message after message, trying to understand what she meant. However, she simply ignored all his questions, which only increased Benjamin's anxiety. He expressed his willingness to go to court for an emergency hearing regarding joint custody of the children, even threatened to try to take the children from her if she did not calm down. Finally, Jessica responded with a short message, "Your life will soon be better." Benjamin was sure that she was just mocking him and enjoying this situation. Jessica claimed that it was the last day she would experience pain, after which she ignored any attempts by Benjamin to contact her. On the morning of July 13, 2017, Jessica wrote to Benjamin again. She offered to meet so that Benjamin could answer some questions. However, Benjamin found everything very suspicious and hesitated to attend the meeting. He didn't suspect that this could turn out to be a fatal mistake. Benjamin tried to get her to talk on the phone to understand what she needed and why they couldn't discuss it without a meeting, but this only made Jessica even angrier. At 4:41 p.m., he received another message in which Jessica complained that she was tired of this bullying that never meant anything to Benjamin. In reality, old accusations and the most frightening threats she had ever voiced since the breakup emerged. Jessica's behavior was so alarming that Benjamin contacted her mother to discuss the situation, suspecting that Jessica was having a breakdown. He feared she could not control herself, might pose a danger to herself and the children. At that time, he was at work and could not leave. He did not suspect that while he was talking to Jessica's mother, Jessica was already driving to his apartment with bad intentions. At about 5 p.m., Jessica parked her car near the complex where Benjamin and Meredith lived. In the parking lot, Jessica saw Meredith, who had just returned from work and was sitting in her car, distracted by the mail on her mobile phone. Jessica approached her, pointed a gun, and shot through the glass, instantly killing her rival, whom she considered the cause of all her troubles. All this happened in broad daylight. As people were returning from work, the noise attracted numerous witnesses. After the incident, people saw Jessica get into her car and drive away. Neighbors contacted the police, reporting this and clarifying one frightening detail. At that time, there were 2 children in the car with the shooter. Witnesses described the shooter, and the police understood who they were talking about. They assumed that Benjamin was in danger. Jessica had enough time to act, but she was not going to go to Benjamin's workplace. Instead, she devised something much more sophisticated and stayed one step ahead of law enforcement. While the authorities were still looking for her in the city and were awaiting Benjamin's arrival at work, Jessica called Benjamin, told him that everyone he loved had left and that she would be next. Then Jessica hung up. It was the last call she made. Police eventually traced the call and went to Easley, 7 miles from the Benjamin home, where they saw her Jeep. The doors of the car were locked from the inside, and the engine was still running. Inside, they found 3 bodies, 2 children and Jessica herself, who was 36 years old. Jessica had persistently called Benjamin in hopes of meeting with him, perhaps intending him to be her first victim. However, he seemed to sense danger and avoided contact as much as possible, often opting to respond via a message on a messaging app. When she received a refusal, she flared up in anger and attacked Meredith, after which Jessica returned home. Near her house, she called Benjamin again. After a meaningless conversation, Jessica first attacked her 5-year-old daughter, then her 9-year-old son, after which she turned the gun on herself. Jessica used the same gun that she had borrowed from her parents on July 11th. During the investigation, detectives found out that Benjamin had been trying to obtain a restraining order against Jessica. He had filed for joint custody on the same day and had communicated with the police officer who came to check on the children. Jessica left 4 suicide notes, 1 for her mother, 1 for her father, 1 for her son's father, and 1 for her husband. In these notes, she expressed her love for her family and her regret for the pain her actions would cause them. Jessica insisted that she could no longer live with these feelings and believed that her children would also suffer without her, so she decided to take not only her life but theirs as well. In the letter to her son's father, she expressed gratitude for giving her her first child and apologized for the pain she had caused. Considering the content of these notes, the police investigated suspicions of domestic violence against the children. Judging by what Jessica wrote, it was possible she had harmed them as a way of exacting revenge on her unfaithful husband. However, nothing like this could be confirmed. As for the last note left by Jessica to Benjamin, it contained several short phrases in which she wished that Benjamin would experience the pain from his cruel act for the rest of his life. The note also stated that he would not be able to hurt them anymore. Among all the individuals involved in this case, Benjamin was the only survivor. The note turned out to be prophetic. Even to this day, he continues to live with the pain of losing his loved ones. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Raynella Dossett Leith. Raynella Dossett Leith was born on October 25, 1948, in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, a small isolated town originally established for workers at the nearby nuclear power plant. Her parents worked at the plant, and because the town was isolated, it was safer than many other American cities. Children were free to play outside. Raynella was a bright student and did well in school. She successfully enrolled at East Tennessee State University in Knoxville, where she studied nursing. There, she met a very ambitious young man named Ed Dossett, who aspired to become a corporate executive or start his own business, and even had political ambitions. He was a quiet, friendly young man, and they both grew up in rural Tennessee. In 1970, the young couple got married and moved to the suburbs of Knoxville. Ed Dossett owned a large old family farm that they renovated with the help of contractors, turning it into the perfect home. After graduating from college, Raynella began working as a nurse at a local hospital and worked her way up to the position of senior nurse. By 1975, she had completed her law degree and begun a successful legal career. In 1978, when the Knoxville County Attorney General retired, Ed Dossett ran for the position and was elected. Raynella played a major role in his success, as he credited much of it to her support. In 1978, the couple welcomed their first daughter. In 1983, they had a son, followed by another daughter in 1985. After learning that she was pregnant with her first child, Raynella decided to quit her job and become a full-time housewife, as her husband had a good income, and she also helped with the farm work. During this time, Ed Dossett served as the Knoxville County Attorney and worked with a secretary named Kay Clift Walker, with whom he had a secret affair. Although Kay had a family of her own, they still spent weekends and holidays together. When Kay became pregnant, she had to quit her job due to her increased responsibilities, but her intimate encounters with Ed Dossett continued. In such a conservative county, having an extramarital relationship was unacceptable for a public servant. Ed Dossett and Kay chose to end their affair to avoid damaging their reputations. However, the situation was more complicated than it seemed. Those who knew Raynella recognized her as a controlling and powerful person. People often did not enjoy interacting with her, let alone befriending her. Ed Dossett's close friends and family knew that his marital problems began soon after they got married, largely due to Raynella's desire to control every aspect of their lives. Many later understood why Ed Dossett decided to leave. During a meeting, Ed Dossett began to experience severe stomach pain. His assistant noticed that he was constantly holding his stomach and seemed unwell. When asked about his health, Ed Dossett expressed that he believed his wife was trying to harm him, implying that she was poisoning his food. However, when offered help, he insisted that he could handle it on his own. By September 1991, his condition had worsened to the point that he had to be hospitalized. Although he was skeptical of his wife's intentions, he later revealed that these fears were unfounded. Doctors performed a series of tests and discovered a malignant tumor in his small intestine and liver. Unfortunately, the cancer was already at an advanced stage, with metastases spreading to nearby organs in the abdominal cavity. Ed Dossett returned home anxiously and shared his diagnosis with Raynella. He later confided to family members that she responded calmly to the news but chose not to discuss the illness. She believed it was better to keep the situation private, thinking it would allow her husband to continue working for as long as possible. She felt that staying active would help prolong his life, and secretly hoped for a miracle that would aid in his recovery. Those who knew Raynella well speculated that her motives were financial, believing she pushed him to work until the end to maintain a steady income. By March 1992, Ed Dossett's health had declined significantly, and it was clear he was losing the battle against his illness. During this time, he wanted his family close, so he contacted loved ones, including his cousin, with whom he had a close relationship until the end of his life. The cousin lived in another state and drove over 700 kilometers to visit Ed Dossett. Raynella refused to let his cousin into the house, leaving him no choice but to leave. That evening, Raynella wrote a letter explaining her actions, claiming that Ed Dossett's serious condition made it impossible for him to receive visitors anymore, and that his appearance might scare them. However, no one found this explanation convincing. Just a few days later, Ed Dossett himself asked his family to visit him one last time, indicating that he did not care about his appearance. The next day, Raynella insisted that Ed Dossett return to work. Despite being in excruciating pain and barely able to move, Ed chose to follow his wife's wishes and continue working until the very end. After only one day of work, he was forced to stop. Now bedridden, Ed Dossett was on near constant morphine to manage his unbearable pain, and doctors estimated he had only a few weeks to live. No one expected anything unusual to happen to Ed Dossett, who was in critical condition and required medical assistance to stay alive. On the morning of July 9, a 911 call was received requesting police and paramedics to Raynella's home for assistance. When the police arrived, they found Raynella in a panic, running around the body of Ed Dossett, who was lying on the ground. Raynella explained that her husband had gone out to check on their cattle. After a while, she heard noises indicating that the cattle were agitated. She tried to call out to Ed Dossett, but there was no response. Fearing he had been trampled by the frightened animals, she grabbed her pistol and fired several shots into the air to scare them away. Initially, the police believed the incident to be an accident. Raynella was taken to the police station for standard questioning. However, as the conversation progressed, her account of her husband's death began to raise suspicions. During the questioning, the police learned that Ed Dossett had a serious illness and had suddenly wanted to check on the cattle, which seemed odd given his poor health and difficulty walking. The police were puzzled as to why Raynella had allowed him to go alone to the herd in such a weakened state, and why she had shown no concern when he took so long to return. Raynella remained in the house until she heard a loud noise, at which point she discovered her husband lying on the ground. Ed Dossett had been trampled and was covered in scratches and hoof marks. Raynella administered first aid and CPR. Having worked in a hospital, she was well versed in these techniques, but unfortunately, nothing seemed to help. As her story unfolded, more bizarre details emerged. Realizing her husband was beyond saving, she called for emergency services, but there was no response. She tried to contact the local hospital directly, but she did not remember their phone number. The police found this suspicious, as she had worked as a senior nurse at a local health center for many years and should have known the number by heart. Despite the inconsistencies, her account was considered credible. She explained that she had not been working for the organization for long and had forgotten the necessary phone numbers. She also mentioned feeling scared and shocked. Eventually, she contacted the local market director, a friend of hers, and asked him to call for help. He then reached out to the emergency services. Unfortunately, the condition of the body made it difficult to determine the cause of death at first glance, so a thorough autopsy was required. Forensic experts arrived to investigate the scene, but they found no physical evidence. Ultimately, Ed Dossett's death was ruled an accident, and the case was closed. However, the real story was just beginning. Those who knew Ed Dossett well realized that in his final days, he was barely conscious for more than a few minutes due to constant pain and required injections of morphine to relieve it. It was strange that he suddenly decided to leave the house to check on the cows. If he tried to stand, he could barely do so on his own. His legs had weakened in the last days of his life. The medical examiner found numerous internal injuries and broken bones on the man. Furthermore, there were hoof marks on his skin, which corroborated Raynella's story. Ed Dossett's relatives knew that his life insurance policy included a clause that doubled the payout if he died in an accident rather than from natural causes such as cancer. Although his wife would still receive a payout, it would be significantly less. Therefore, it was in her best interest to present her husband's death as an accident. Since the authorities classified his death as an accident, she could collect double the compensation. This is why Raynella initially tried to hide her husband's illness from the police. Ed Dossett's relatives decided to investigate the circumstances surrounding his death. Discovering inconsistencies in the case, Ed Dossett's blood had almost no morphine, which was surprising given his regular use of high doses. He had terminal cancer and could only manage his pain with large amounts of painkillers. The forensic expert confirmed that the morphine level was 0, indicating that he had not taken any medication for at least a day. However, it seemed that Ed Dossett could not move without painkillers. Despite this, the official inquest was closed. It is believed that Ed Dossett may have staged his own death, as he was nearing the end of his life and wanted to go on his own terms. Perhaps he was worried about his family and considered this his last wish. But it is difficult to understand why he did not at least take a painkiller to alleviate his suffering before staging this incident. All of this creates a confusing picture with contradictory details. At the funeral, Ed Dossett's friends confirmed their suspicions about Raynella. Eyewitnesses noted that she seemed carefree and even cheerful, which was surprising for a grieving widow. Rather than mourning her husband, she appeared to treat the event as a social gathering, mingling and chatting with guests. This behavior was especially strange given her usual rudeness toward others following her husband's death. It seemed that she had finally been relieved of the burden of caring for him. She had not worked for a long time, had received a large sum of money, and felt no need to find employment. Instead, she chose to spend most of her time with her children. However, Raynella soon grew tired of this lifestyle. She and her children began visiting a nearby swimming pool owned by a man named David Lead. David was a well-known figure in the local community. He was married and had a daughter. Raynella and David had little in common. Raynella was well-educated, while David had dropped out of school at 19 without graduating. He eventually became a hairdresser and opened his own beauty salon, gaining recognition in town. David was always proud of his appearance and underwent several cosmetic surgeries to look younger. Unfortunately, his satisfaction with his looks did not last long. One day, an accident caused a large piece of debris to hit his eye, disfiguring his face and leaving him partially blind. Since then, he has worn sunglasses. As Raynella and her children spent more time at the pool, they grew closer to David. He began an affair with Raynella, which his wife eventually discovered. She filed for divorce, but by then, David was deeply in love with Raynella and indifferent to the divorce proceedings. They quickly divorced, and in January 1993, Raynella married David. He moved to her farm just 6 months after Ed Dossett's death, which sparked new rumors and gossip in the community about her marrying her late husband's friend, especially considering the suspicious circumstances surrounding Ed Dossett's death. The situation became a real scandal. Initially, she and David ignored the questions and gossip, but eventually, the rumors died down. Soon after, she began to display her domineering and harsh personality. David's daughter, who had seen him driving his pickup truck in a bad mood, asked her father what had happened. He told her that he had argued with Raynella, but did not want to share more details. His daughter was shocked, as it was the first time she had seen him like that. In 1994, a heartbreaking tragedy struck Raynella. Her son died tragically. He and his sister had been driving with a temporary license that allowed them to drive as long as a licensed adult was present. However, that day, the boy was driving without adult supervision, lost control of the car, and crashed into an oncoming vehicle. The boy, who was not wearing a seatbelt, was thrown through the windshield and suffered serious injuries, dying before the ambulance arrived. Raynella was taken to the police station for questioning after the incident. Several witnesses stated that there were no adults in the car when the boy was driving, but Raynella claimed she was in the car with the children and that the tragic accident happened before she could react. Despite this, the police believed Raynella's story and chose not to prosecute her. If the case had been thoroughly investigated, Raynella could have faced consequences that could have prevented further events from occurring. However, her persuasive speaking skills helped her avoid further legal trouble. Following these events, divorce proceedings began between Kay Clift Walker, Ed Dossett's former secretary, and her current husband, Steve Walker. Her husband was shocked to discover that their second child with Kay was actually Ed Dossett's. Raynella, who knew about the affair, contacted Steve to discuss the situation. The day after they met, she requested another meeting to discuss important documents. Raynella invited Steve to her farm to review the documents confirming the paternity of all of Kay's children with Ed Dossett. In a shocking turn of events, Raynella pulled out a loaded pistol and began attacking Steve. Fortunately, he dodged the bullets and escaped unharmed. Steve considered calling the police for assistance, but Raynella acted first and called them herself. In a panic, she falsely claimed that Steve had brought a weapon to her home and threatened her. The police quickly discovered the truth, leading to Raynella being charged with attempted murder. After a preliminary hearing, she was released on $200,000 bail. Raynella later accepted a plea deal, which resulted in a sentence of 6 years of probation and 100 days of community service. Meanwhile, Raynella continues to research her inheritance after David's death. His daughter, who was only entitled to 10% of the estate, was supposed to inherit the house and the rest of the estate. In January 2000, David began to suffer from various health problems, including hallucinations, high cholesterol, and even a stroke. Raynella handled the situation by preventing family members from visiting David and limiting contact with his daughter and their nephew. Fortunately, David recovered and was discharged from the hospital, but his health problems forced him to quit his business. By this time, he was showing signs of dementia. During a visit to a neurologist, he vaguely recalled an incident involving suffocation with a pillow, but the neurologist dismissed it as another hallucination. On March 13, David's mother was hospitalized for cancer. Unexpectedly, Raynella visited her at the hospital and then contacted David's daughter, asking her to visit her father. She expressed that she had left a plate of food and medicine on the bedside table, but was worried that David might not finish eating. It was unclear why she suddenly became so anxious, and how she knew he had even touched the food. The call was strange because, in recent months, Raynella had done everything she could to limit David's daughter's contact with her father and prevent them from communicating. Additionally, she had never visited her mother-in-law, so her appearance at the hospital took everyone by surprise. David's daughter then went to the house to check on her father, but no one answered her phone calls or opened the door. She eventually found David with a head injury and quickly called the police. When the police arrived, they found Raynella immediately discussing her decision to end David's life. She insisted he had good reasons for this, citing his long-term battle with depression. However, David loved his daughter very much, and his mental health seemed stable because he was managing his illness well. Raynella told the police that on the day he died, she had left him food on the bedside table before visiting her mother-in-law. Before leaving, he had spoken to her and kissed her goodbye. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it, but now she realized that was his way of saying goodbye to her for the last time. Raynella claimed that David's actions constituted a voluntary departure from life, but she also mentioned that it was the first time she had seen a weapon. However, given her dubious past full of lies and contradictions, few believed her. There were some strange details in this case. At the crime scene, 3 shots were fired. The first missed, the second was fatal, and the third also missed David. Additionally, 1 shot came from a different type of weapon that was not found at the crime scene. David was wounded on the left side of his head, despite being right-handed and having lost most of his vision in his left eye due to a previous traffic accident. This suggests that he would have struggled to aim accurately at that part of his head. David's family believes that Raynella was responsible for the murder. It seemed that the Raynella might eventually be brought to justice, but she acted quickly by arranging for the cremation of her second husband, David. This move destroyed much of the evidence that could have been used in court, making it impossible to conduct a proper autopsy. David's daughter was devastated by her father's death and even more shocked to discover that he had left her virtually nothing. Despite efforts to bring the police into the case, 3 years passed without any progress. Raynella manipulated those around her with her money and status, and she lied to the police several times. Finally, in 2006, when David's daughter realized that she could not obtain justice through government agencies, she decided to hire a private investigator. Her goal was to seek justice and prevent Raynella from gaining an undeserved inheritance from David. She was certain that her father would never do this to her. It was all a setup. Private investigators uncovered clear evidence of Raynella's guilt, leading to the reopening of the official investigation into David's death. The police finally took the evidence against Raynella seriously and thoroughly examined the cases surrounding the deaths of her two husbands. The toxicology report on Ed Dossett's death revealed an error. In fact, there was a dangerously high level of morphine in his system, which could have been fatal. With such a high concentration of the painkiller, he would not have been able to move, let alone care for his cows. In 2006, Raynella was charged with the murder of Ed Dossett. It became clear that his death was no accident. She had discreetly contacted a funeral home and paid for her second husband's cremation, raising suspicions that she was trying to hide the evidence. As a result, Raynella faced charges of premeditated murder. However, she portrayed herself as the victim, convincing several people in the process and manipulating the trial in her favor. Raynella did not plead guilty to the murder. She was released on $5,000 bail, and her formal trial was set for March 2009. The jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision, with only one juror believing she was innocent, while the others believed she had planned to kill her husband for financial gain. As a result of this impasse, the case was retried in 2010. During the retrial, experts revealed that the bullet that killed David Leith was fired from a distance of at least 30 centimeters, too far for a suicide attempt. David did not have the arm length necessary to wield a weapon at that distance. Fingerprints found on the murder weapon also suggested that the scene had been staged after the crime. Raynella visited David's mother at the hospital to establish an alibi. She tried to contact David's daughter, locate her father, and call the police. The prosecutor argued that David had been given a cocktail of drugs typically used for surgical patients, which only nurses had access to. On January 25, 2010, after 2 days of deliberations, a jury found Raynella Dossett Leith guilty of first-degree murder for David's death. She was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 50 years. Shortly after the verdict, charges related to the death of Raynella's first husband, Ed Dossett, were dismissed for reasons that remain unclear. In early 2011, it was discovered that the verdict had been entered while the judge was a drug addict, which may have influenced the outcome. On the plus side, David's will was found to be invalid because his illness had impaired his mental capacity. As a result, half of the estate was confiscated, and Raynella returned David's assets to his daughter. Her lawyers attempted to appeal the case, but their efforts were unsuccessful. The defense continued to fight and achieved a breakthrough in January 2017, when Raynella returned to court. The prosecution argued that Raynella's murder plan fell apart when she fired the first shot, which dramatically changed the situation. The second shot was believed to be the fatal one. David's daughter testified that Raynella had been acting strangely and unusually on the day of the incident. The prosecution contended that Raynella's odd behavior was an attempt to create an alibi for herself. Steve Walker, Kay's husband, who had been attacked by Raynella earlier, also spoke at the trial. He stated that Raynella clearly intended to kill him and even shouted about her intentions. He believed that he was only saved by luck. He was furious that Raynella had escaped punishment and that she believed she could act without consequences. It appeared that Raynella picked up the weapon again and attacked her second husband. To further support her claim that David had taken his own life, the defense brought an expert into the courtroom. The defense expert demonstrated to the jury how David Leith could have fired all 3 shots. Ultimately, the judge acquitted Raynella Dossett Leith, stating that there was no evidence to prove her guilt. She noted that no blood or gunpowder residue was found on David's body, and that Raynella had an alibi for the time of his death because she was in the hospital. There was no evidence to prove that Raynella committed the crime or that she was the last person to see David alive. The defense celebrated the verdict, while the prosecution and jury were disappointed. Raynella, who has repeatedly evaded the justice system, remains free. Now 76, she lives on her farm, and no one dares to question her about the deaths of her 2 husbands. Her children support her. Unfortunately, it seems the truth about these tragic deaths will never be discovered, but many believe she was directly involved in the deaths of both husbands.
In 1995, 11-year-old Lacey Phillips lived with her mother, Mary, her father, James, and her older siblings. Brother Jesse, who was 15 at the time, and sister Darla, who was 17. The family was very close-knit and had a strong bond. The Phillips family lived in their own home in a small town called Bald Knob, Arkansas, which they had moved to 5 years earlier from Hope, Arkansas. They considered Bald Knob an ideal place for family life and raising children. Mary was known as a loving mother and wife, fond of gardening, outdoor recreation. The Phillips family was a typical American family, slowly building their happiness, unaware of how cruelly it would eventually be destroyed. On June 6, 1995, 11-year-old Lacey was under the supervision of her older sister, Darla. Both were students, but summer vacation had begun. Their mothers go to work during this time, and often the children will stay at home waiting for their parents to return. However, at 4 p.m. that day, Lacey had an appointment with the dentist, which coincided with Mary's end of her work shift. Consequently, Darla drove Lacey to the workplace, where their mother worked as an accountant in an automated tax and accounting service. It was planned that Lacey would wait until her mother finished work and then go to the appointment together. Darla later described this outing as completely ordinary. She talked with Mary for a while, and then Darla went home, planning to meet her friends later. She and her mother said goodbye and hugged, unaware that this would be their last meeting. Although Mary and Lacey were expected to be a little late coming back from the dentist, it was merely a routine checkup that wasn't supposed to take long. Meanwhile, Jesse and Darla were left alone at home. Their father was on a business trip 500 kilometers away. The siblings expected their mother and Lacey to return by 5 p.m., but as much more time passed with no sign of mother, they began to worry. At around 6 p.m., both teenagers grew increasingly worried as neither returned from the dentist's office. Lacey is too young to have her own plans, and Mary had no other plans for the evening. Even if something had changed, Mary always called the children to inform them if she would be late. Her uncharacteristic absence without warning heightened their concern. Darla assumed her mother might be late at work, so she called the office but received no answer. Concerned, she then headed to the dental clinic, but there was no sign of Mary or Lacey. Time passed, and as the sun began to set, Darla contacted their father to share their growing worries. He suggested they leave the house and look around the area, considering that Mary's car might have broken down or she might need help. Jesse and Darla searched the vicinity but found nothing. They returned to their house and reported their findings to their father, prompting him to contact the police. A dispatch officer spoke to James to gather necessary information. He provided details about where Mary worked, the car she drove, and their trip to the dentist set for around 4 p.m. The most alarming fact was that Mary and Lacey never reached the dentist. Law enforcement took James's report seriously, confirming that no one had arrived at the dental office. Around midnight, an officer was dispatched to check Mary's workplace. Upon arrival at the parking lot in front of the building, the patrolman noticed a pickup truck parked alone. After checking the license plate, he confirmed it was indeed Mary Phillips' vehicle. This discovery intensified fears that something had gone terribly wrong. The car was intact and locked, so the officer decided to check the office where Mary worked. He knocked on the door, which surprisingly opened because it was unlocked. Upon entering, He found the lights were off and had to use a flashlight to explore. It was then that he discovered something horrifying: the body of a woman covered in blood, with her hands tightly bound behind her back. A cord from a household appliance was wrapped around her neck, and her clothes were pulled down. The officer immediately realized she had been brutally beaten. A pulse check indicated she was dead. The body was cold, suggesting she had been killed hours earlier. The office resembled the aftermath of a violent struggle, with blood scattered around, intensifying concerns that the perpetrator might still be present. The patrolman called for reinforcements and continued to carefully inspect the rooms while waiting for his colleagues to arrive. He checked the office and then moved to the utility rooms, where he noticed a trail of blood leading to another door, which was also unlocked. He entered without any problems and saw a gruesome scene. In the middle of the room was a chair to which a girl was tied, also covered in blood. There was especially a lot of blood. Her face showed clear signs of having received several blows to the head. Thought the girl was dead, he managed to take several pictures of the second victim when she suddenly woke up, opened her eyes, and looked in his direction. Later, the police officer recalled this moment as one of the most terrible and unexpected in his life, as if he had seen a dead person returning to life. The patrolman immediately turned to his colleagues and, in addition to requesting reinforcements, asked them to call for doctors. He freed the girl and tried to provide first aid, but it quickly became obvious that she was in serious condition and that only doctors could fully help her. Despite her injuries, she was conscious and could speak. She clearly stated that her name was Lacey Phillips. The only thing that worried her was her mother's condition. She asked several times what had happened to Mary and if everything was okay with her, but the policeman distracted her from these troubling thoughts, not telling her the truth. The medics arrived a few minutes later, and Lacey was urgently taken to the nearest medical facility. On the way, she regained consciousness and then lost it again. Lacey had sustained a serious head injury from several strong blows to the head with a blunt object. Additionally, marks were found on her neck indicating strangulation, and in addition to sustaining a fracture in her cranial vault, she had a broken jaw. Mary's husband, James, was notified that something had happened to his loved ones but was given no details. He immediately packed his things and left for the city to see his daughter in the hospital to support her. He was shocked and did not understand what had happened to his family. Now, the doctors did not dare to provide a prognosis on whether the Phillips' youngest daughter, Lacey, would survive. An even greater blow was the death of 34-year-old Mary. She could not be saved and had died before the patrolman arrived. Forensic experts worked at the crime scene but were unable to find any clues that would lead to the criminal. Their only hope was Lacey, who had miraculously survived the attack, and they awaited news from the medical center with excitement. A few hours later, doctors managed to stabilize Lacey's condition. The morning after the attack, on June 7th, she woke up in hospital. She was in the intensive care unit, and they were finally able to communicate. Despite her traumatic brain injury, she remembered perfectly what had happened. Later, Lacey admitted that all of it was captured in her memory. Lacey began to recount the frightening details of how her older sister had taken her to their mother's workplace at about 3 p.m. She remained in the office until 3:45 p.m., as both of them were getting ready to go to the dentist's office for a routine checkup. The workday was almost over. But a few minutes before it ended, an unfamiliar man entered the office. He immediately headed to the desk where Mary worked. She and Mary looked at him and even stepped back. There was something frightening in his gaze, but they thought he was just a client who had come into the office. When the stranger raised his hands, it became obvious that he was not there for advice. He was wearing latex gloves. In one hand, he held a roll of wire, and in the other, a gun with which he threatened Mary and Lacey. The man announced that it was a robbery. Mary tried to cover herself and protect her daughter, but he pushed Mary's aside, knocked her to the floor, and began tying her wrists behind her back with the wire. Lacey was confused, scared, and unable to react. Everything happened too quickly. After tying up Mary, the unknown man shouted at Lacey and ordered her to follow him into another room. He brought a chair from Mary's office, placed it in the middle of the room, and forced she to sit on it while he tied her hands to the chair behind her back. She cried, begged him not to harm her and her mother. The criminal said he would not harm Mary but would hurt her daughter. After securing Lacey to the chair with wire, he immediately hit her hard on the head with the handle of the pistol. Her eyes went dark, and she lost consciousness. After which, the stranger left the room, closing the door behind him. Lacey was left alone. She was tightly tied up and couldn't even move. She felt like she was bleeding from her head. Lacey regained consciousness a few minutes later, looked around, and saw that blood was all around the chair. She was in pain, but she couldn't imagine the extent of the head injury she had sustained. She began to scream and call for help, hoping that her mother would enter the room and untie her. The door swung open, and to her horror, it was the same man again. He was furious that she was still alive and screamed, striking she again before grabbing her by the neck and beginning to strangle her until she lost consciousness once more. This lasted for several minutes. Perhaps the criminal was afraid of being caught, so he wanted to escape from the building as quickly as possible. He believed he had killed Lacey, turned off the light, and left the room. The criminal immediately fled the office. Several hours passed. Lacey came to her senses but then lost consciousness again. Each time she regained consciousness, she tried to get free and called for her mother but received no response. Her hands were tightly bound with metal wire. Lacey grew weaker with every minute. The only hope for salvation was the thought that someone would find them. About 8 hours passed during which Lacey remained locked in the dark room, bleeding. She was half asleep, could barely move, and had lost all strength. Suddenly, the girl heard a faint clicking sound coming from the next room. At first, she was scared that it was the attacker, but then the sounds were repeated next to her, and flashes appeared in her half-asleep state. Lacey realized it looked like a photo shoot. She confirmed it when she opened her eyes and saw someone taking her picture. Fortunately, it was not the criminal. It was a policeman who had arrived at the office to check on Lacey. Lacey remembered how the ambulance had arrived, how the policeman freed her. She was losing and regaining consciousness on the way to the intensive care unit of the nearest children's hospital. All this time, the doctors talked to her to keep her conscious. At each moment of clarity, Lacey tried to find out what had happened to her mother, but she never received an answer to any of her questions. Even now, while talking to the police, she still did not know that Mary was dead. After the police visit to the hospital, her father, brother, and sister came into the ward. They brought balloons and soft toys. Lacey still believed that her mother, like her, was in the hospital and had probably also suffered at the hands of the attacker but was still alive. The whole day of June 7th, Lacey's relatives spent with she, but they never answered any of her questions about Mary. She saw how, with each passing moment, her father's eyes filled with tears. Doubt began to creep in, but at that time, Lacey was still too weak and simply pushed away the bad thoughts. In the evening, James gathered his strength, went up to his daughter, knelt down, and hugged her. In a trembling voice, he told her that Mary was now in heaven with her great-grandmother. The detective leading the investigation could not afford to be sentimental, as the criminal responsible for the attack was still on the loose and might strike again. The local residents were in danger, and the bloodthirsty killer had to be stopped urgently. When Lacey found out about this, she realized with horror that she was the only chance for the police to catch the criminal. She also understood that she was in great danger and that the attacker might return to eliminate her as an unwanted witness. In the office where he committed the murder and attempted murder, the stranger left no traces. He managed to avoid leaving evidence by using latex gloves, which Lacey reported. However, he left biological fluids after abusing Mary, but their examination would take time, and the research capabilities of that era were much more modest. Therefore, the results only allowed the police to limit the circle of suspects, which at that point was not substantial. The criminal was likely an experienced killer. He knew how to avoid being caught, acted covertly, and used gloves. However, the police still had the main source of information, Lacey. She remembered the attacker perfectly and provided a very detailed description, including the smallest details of his clothing, appearance. Having learned that this man had taken her mother away from her, she was determined to bring him to justice. Describing the face of the criminal, Lacey suddenly recalled one important detail. Before he struck her on the head, While he had tied her hands with metal wire, she noticed a teardrop tattoo on his face, as well as a tattoo on his arm. This detail allowed the detectives to match these distinctive features with registered criminals. Detectives quickly identified a 31-year-old man named Jack Jones, who had the tattoos described by Lacey. Jack was well known to the local police for multiple robbery charges, but investigators did not suspect that he was responsible for much more serious crimes. The police quickly discovered Jack Jones's last known residence and went to apprehend him, expecting that he might already be on the run. To their surprise, Jack personally opened the door, did not seem alarmed at all. He was immediately brought to the station for questioning. While being taken to the department, detectives contemplated what tactics to employ to get the criminal to talk. To their surprise, no tricks were needed. As soon as Jack was asked about Mary and Lacey, he calmly began to recount what had happened. He stated that he had seen Mary standing in her office early that same day while he was driving past. As soon as it happened, he decided that he wanted to kill her because he found her incredibly beautiful. He returned later, knowing that the office closed around 4 p.m., when there should have been no one there. However, he saw a girl there but did not retreat. He tied up Lacey in the room because he was not interested in her. His goal from the very beginning was Mary. He bound her hands behind her back, placed her on the floor, abused her, and then cut a cord from the kettle, wrapped it around her neck, and began to strangle her. According to Jack Jones, this murder was an act of revenge for the abuse of his wife, as her attacker remained unpunished. The investigation revealed that Jack's wife did report the crime to the police, but later she retracted her statement against the abuser, leading to his release. Jack insisted that his wife was indeed abused, but why Mary had to pay for it remained a mystery. On the evening of June 7, 1995, Jack Jones was arrested for the abuse and murder of Mary. He was also charged with the attempted murder of Lacey. When the Phillips family was informed, everyone breathed a sigh of relief, as no one could be sure that the killer wouldn't come back to eliminate the only witness. However, their fight was just beginning, as Jack still had to be brought to justice in court. Thanks to his confession, there should not be any problems. Lacey did not want to attend the hearings to avoid further trauma, but the existing evidence against him was enough to send him to prison. The trial began in April of 1996. By that time, law enforcement officials had carefully reviewed all the evidence against Jack. It was decided to show in court a recording of Lacey's account, made on a dictaphone while she was recovering from her injuries in the hospital. She quickly recovered physically, but psychologically she was broken. However, even in such a state, she wanted justice. The defense attorney tried to refute her statement, but the jury did not believe him. The defendant himself pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming that he was not himself during the attack on the mother and daughter because he was treating his bipolar disorder with illegal drugs. His arguments about a difficult childhood were also unconvincing. Ultimately, the jury found Jack Jones guilty on all counts. For the murder of Mary Phillips, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For the brutal beating of Lacey, he received a life sentence along with an additional 30 years and a fine of $15,000 for the attempted murder of Lacey. But this was not the end of Jack's criminal story. While on death row, he confessed to another murder, that of 32-year-old Lori Barrett. This incident occurred during her 5-day vacation in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where she planned to visit friends. Because she arrived late, she didn't want to bother her friend's family and decided to stay at a hotel instead. That evening, Barrett went to a local bar to relax after her trip. There, she met a young man with several tattoos. According to several witnesses who spoke to the police, Barrett was seen drinking with the stranger until about 2 a.m. in the hotel patio. After that, they went up in the elevator together, presumably to her room. The next day, she failed to show up for a planned barbecue with her friend. Later, a cleaning lady went to her room and found her body, which had been abused and strangled. Jack Jones confessed to this murder in 2005, claiming that he liked Barrett right away, and they spent the whole evening together before going up to her room. However, the details of what happened next and the reason for the attack remain unknown, as Jack refused to disclose them. For the trial related to this case, He was extradited to Florida and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, after which he was returned to Arkansas to await execution. Interestingly, Jack Jones could have been caught and convicted of this crime while it was still being committed. A composite sketch was created based on witness statements and footage from the hotel's security cameras. His sister identified him after seeing the sketch in a newspaper and showed it to their father, who insisted that she never talk about the event or show Jack's image to anyone else. She complied, remaining silent. Jack's father then put him on a bus and sent him to Arkansas to prevent anyone from recognizing him based on the composite sketch. Unfortunately, it cost Mary Phillips her life. When Jack's family was questioned about the story, they admitted that they knew their son had met with Barrett before the attack but did not believe that Jack could be involved in such a brutal crime. Consequently, the father decided not to contact the police. They described Jack as a very complex person who grew increasingly gloomy and cruel with age, taking out his anger not only on his siblings but also on his parents. However, they justified his behavior until the last moment, believing he could be loving and gentle. They did not think he was capable of murder. On April 24, 2017, 52-year-old Jack Jones was executed for the murder of Mary Phillips at the Cummins unit, along with abuser-murderer Marcel Williams, marking the first double execution in the country in 17 years. Jones and Williams were 2 of 4 inmates executed in Arkansas in April 2017, the other 2 being convicted murderers Liddell Lee and Kenneth Williams. Jones's last meal consisted of fried chicken, fries with tartar sauce, beef jerky, 3 candy bars, a chocolate milkshake, and juice. Lacey, now grown, was present at the execution. When Jack was given his last words, he turned to the victim's daughter, tenderly called her by name, and claimed that he had perceived her as his daughter all his life. Naturally, this only caused her disgust and anger. After the execution, it was revealed that Jack Jones was involved in another murder. Just before his execution, he gave his sister a letter he had written in 2006, with instructions to open it a year after his execution. She respected his request. When she finally opened the letter from her brother, she read a terrible confession. On May 2, 1983, 20-year-old Regina Harrison left her house in the evening to ride her bike. At that time, 19-year-old Jack Jones was riding his bike towards the beach. He meets Regina, who catches his eye, and secretly follows her to a deserted street, where he attacks, abuses, and kills her. They began to search for her that same evening after Regina did not return home at the appointed time. The next day, her body was found in a nearby park with signs of abuse and strangulation, which became the cause of death. During the investigation of this crime, detectives found a witness who identified the criminal as Ronald Stewart, who was passing by the park at the approximate time of the murder. In January of 1985, Ronald pleaded guilty and was then sentenced to 50 years in prison. He died behind bars of cancer in 2008. It later turned out that the only reason an innocent man took the blame was that Ronald Stewart had already committed a series of abuses of other girls. He had been convicted of those crimes and was now afraid of the death penalty, so he made a deal with the prosecution and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Ronald never denied his guilt during his lifetime, but DNA testing later showed that he was not guilty of Regina's murder. After Jack Jones' sister, Lynn, went to the police and handed over the letter confessing to the murder, DNA testing was conducted, and in February 2019, his words were officially confirmed: Jack was behind Regina's murder. Before the execution, he lost one of his legs due to diabetes. He stated that he was ready to die, and it remains unknown why he confessed to the murders of Mary and Barrett but did not do the same regarding Regina Harrison until he only mentioned it in a letter to his sister. After the execution, it became official that Jack had killed at least 3 young women. Law enforcement officials now believe that he could have been involved in more brutal crimes. Mary's widower, after Jack's death, spoke out against people who expressed support for the criminal. There were supporters of the killer who believed that he deserved a lighter sentence and demanded that the execution be cancelled. However, James said that he did not believe they would have maintained such a loyal attitude towards the criminal if he had killed their loved ones. Lacey, after talking to journalists, said that she could finally move on with her life. Justice had finally prevailed, and this dangerous criminal would no longer be able to harm anyone. However, even despite the execution, she believed that she would never be able to completely free herself from the consequences of the horror she had endured.
Not all relationships are healthy. Some can be harmful, leave lasting emotional and physical damage. This is the troubling story of a romance between a prominent dentist and her coworker. From the beginning, their relationship displayed signs of turmoil. Over nearly 5 years, they broke up and reconciled multiple times. Despite the ups and downs, she remained optimistic, giving him numerous opportunities. In reality, he never truly let her go. He employed various forms of emotional manipulation, pressure, and psychological control to keep her close. When she finally gathered the strength to take charge of her life and informed him of her decision to move on for good, it triggered a series of events with catastrophic consequences. Preeti Reddy was born in the lively Indian city of Pimpri-Chinchwad, located along the Pavana River. The family enjoyed a comfortable life due to her parents' stable and substantial income. Preeti grew up with her younger sister Nithya. From a young age, the sisters developed a strong bond and were almost inseparable. They shared everything: childhood secrets, dreams, and challenges. Their parents created a loving environment, emphasizing strong cultural values and respect for family. As financially secure individuals, their parents were committed to investing in their daughter's well-being and future. Education was a top priority in the Reddy home. The girls were given every opportunity to thrive. In 1996, the Reddy family made a significant change by moving to Australia in search of better opportunities and a brighter future. They settled in a quiet suburb of Sydney and bought a spacious home that quickly became their refuge. Preeti and Nithya started attending a well-regarded private school, where both thrived academically. Preeti developed into a bright, charismatic young woman who was friendly, sociable, and ambitious. From an early age, and she aspired to follow her parents' path in healthcare, finding true joy in helping others and making a positive impact. After finishing high school, Preeti made an unexpected decision to return to India to study dentistry at a medical university in New Delhi. Her parents, always supportive, trusted her choices and allowed her the freedom to decide for herself. By 2019, Preeti had earned her degree and returned to Sydney, where she moved back in with her family. She started working at the Dental and Physiotherapy Centre in Western Sydney, while also enhancing her skills at the Royal Dental Hospital in Melbourne. Later, she joined Glenbrook Dental, a comprehensive care clinic where she worked as a general practitioner. Highly skilled and passionate about her profession, Dr. Preeti Reddy was recognized by her colleagues and patients as a rising star in dentistry. She was committed to continuous learning and improving her expertise. In early 2013, just before a major life event, she was enrolled in specialized courses for dental implants, hoped to open her own clinic in Melbourne. Unfortunately, those dreams would remain unfulfilled. While still studying at the Royal Dental Hospital in Melbourne, Preeti met a young dentist named Harshwardhan Nard, whom his friends called Harshwardhan Nard. He, like Preeti, was of Indian descent and came from a family of healthcare professionals. Following their tradition by pursuing a career in dentistry, the two quickly connected, feeling an attraction toward each other almost right away. A few months into their friendship, they started dating, but early on, some warning signs emerged. Harshwardhan was possessive and had a quick temper. He frequently questioned Preeti's choices, emotionally manipulated her, and tried to control her subtly. He also undermined her confidence, making her feel inadequate or inferior. He often blamed her for his struggles and claimed she was the source of his pain. Nithya, Preeti's younger sister, was the first to sense that something was wrong. She knew Preeti was dating someone, but Preeti had never introduced him to the family. She never brought him home and avoided talking about him. At the same time, Preeti's behavior changed. She became withdrawn, insecure, and distant. The spark in her eyes faded, turning her from a joyful and confident woman into someone who seemed tense, under emotional strain. Harshwardhan was controlling the relationship, and Preeti appeared trapped. Their parents often asked to meet this man in Preeti's life, but she consistently changed the subject or refused to discuss it. It was clear that she felt uncomfortable in the relationship, yet she remained emotionally tied to Harshwarden and found it difficult to escape. Harshwarden lived in Tamworth and worked at a dental clinic. He was in a long-distance relationship with Preeti, as they never lived together. Deep down, she felt that their relationship wouldn't end well. It was unstable, filled with frequent arguments and emotional tension, leaving Preeti feeling overwhelmed. For a long time, she kept their relationship a secret. It wasn't until about 6 months in that she shared it with a few close friends. Preeti's sister, Nithya, met Harshwarden a few times and immediately disliked him. She later remembered feeling that there was something unsettling about his presence. By 2014, Preeti and Harshwarden were publicly acknowledged as a couple, but their relationship remained complicated. Preeti never introduced him to her parents and refused to meet his family. Soon after, they broke up, but Preeti chose to keep it private. This cycle of breaking up and getting back together continued for years. At times, she wouldn't inform anyone about their breakups, and at other times, she wouldn't admit they had reconciled. It became clear that she felt embarrassed by their unstable relationship. Harshwarden often accused Preeti of not investing enough in their relationship and pushed her to move to Tamworth so they could live together. However, Preeti was resolute. She didn't want to abandon her career or leave her family in Sydney. Meanwhile, Harshwarden was unwilling to move for her. In the fall of 2016, Preeti and Harshwarden broke up again. Preeti wanted it to be final this time, but Harshwarden wasn't ready to let go. In October, he started planning a surprise party for her upcoming 30th birthday. However, the surprise did not happen because Preeti had already organized a celebration at her parents' house, invited close friends and colleagues, deliberately excluding Harshwarden. Despite this clear message, Harshwarden continued to try to re-enter her life. He pleaded for another chance, insisting that he had changed and that things would be different this time. Although he had never been physically aggressive, his constant emotional pressure had caused Preeti significant distress. This lack of visible harm may have contributed to Preeti deciding to give him one last opportunity, hoping for a fresh start. However, things did not improve. Preeti still had emotional feelings for Harshwarden, which made it difficult to cut ties completely. Additionally, Harshwarden manipulated her emotions, making her feel guilty for the end of their relationship. In 2018, Preeti made one last attempt to save her relationship, but soon realized that no matter how much she tried or sacrificed, nothing was going to change. That fall, she decided to end it for good. Just a few weeks later, in November, she met a young physician from Melbourne, and they quickly formed a genuine connection. This new man was everything Harshwarden was not: kind, attentive, and compassionate. For the first time in years, Preeti was open about her relationship, proudly introducing him to her family and friends. She felt truly happy and hopeful about the future. She even considered moving to Melbourne to be closer to him by applying for jobs in the area. Prestigious dental centers quickly responded to her applications, and after receiving multiple offers, she chose a clinic where she hoped to work after completing her responsibilities in Sydney. In December, she excitedly told her friends that she had never felt this way before. She had finally moved on from her past. Her loved ones were delighted to see her so happy. But unfortunately, this joy was short-lived. In January, Harshwarden found out that Preeti was in a new relationship. Overwhelmed by jealousy and anger, he began contacting her again through calls and messages, hoping to meet her. However, Preeti had decided to move on and ignored all of his attempts to reach her. By February, during a phone conversation with his brother, Harshwarden admitted that he couldn't accept what he felt was a betrayal. He spoke about Preeti as if she were still his, viewing her new relationship as a personal insult. He expressed that he wouldn't let her marry someone else and suggested he might take extreme actions. At the time, his words seemed like mere bitter threats, stemming from frustration and a sense of powerlessness. On March 31st, 2019, Sydney hosted a two-day international dental conference showcasing the latest advancements in dentistry. Dr. Preeti attended the conference and stayed at the Swissotel Hotel with two close friends and colleagues. Her ex-boyfriend, Dr. Harshwarden, also rented a room at this hotel. After the first day, Preeti shared with her friends that she felt uneasy because Harshvardhan was watching her closely throughout the conference and seemed to be waiting for a chance to talk to her. His behavior was making her feel uncomfortable and unpredictable. Later that evening, the friends went to a nightclub to relax, but Preeti still felt anxious and kept looking over her shoulder. The second day was filled with even more tension as Harshvardhan insisted they meet and talk. Preeti felt anxious and conflicted, while her friends urged her not to give in despite their concerns. After the conference, she reluctantly decided to speak with Harshvardhan, hoping to resolve their issues. She had practiced what she wanted to say, wishing he would listen and put an end to the drama so she could continue with her life. At around 6:30 p.m. on March the 2nd, surveillance cameras recorded a gray Volkswagen Golf, which belonged to Preeti, leaving the underground garage of Swissatel Hotel. Preeti was driving, and Harshvardhan was seated next to her. About an hour later, they arrived at the Ravi's Cumin Indian restaurant in nearby Crow's Nest and entered together. Witnesses, including other diners and restaurant staff, noted that there was significant tension at their table. Preeti looked anxious and wanted to leave, while Harshvardhan tried to hold her hand and interrupted her as she spoke. The waiter in charge of their table recalled that Preeti mentioned she was planning to move to Melbourne, confessed to being in love with someone else, and asked Harshvardhan to let her go. Despite this, Harshvardhan seemed unaware of her feelings. He continued to talk about marriage and promised to move to Sydney just to be close to her. Around 10:16 p.m., they left the restaurant and walked to their car but didn't get in. They argued for over an hour at that spot. Surveillance cameras show Harshvardhan reaching out towards Preeti, then pushing her as she backed away and took a step back, causing her to stumble. They finally drove off close to midnight and spent another 15 minutes driving around the city before stopping in a mall parking lot. Neither of them got out of the car. Surveillance cameras on the building captured them in a heated argument, with Harshvardhan making wild gestures and Preeti crying visibly. At about 2 p.m., Preeti got out of the car and entered a 24-hour fast food restaurant in the mall. She bought a bottle of water and waited near the entrance, seemingly for Harshvardhan to come out. However, when she went back, he was still sitting in the car. They then drove to the Swissatel Hotel. He quietly led Preeti past the front desk and into his suite. After around 3 a.m., she did not leave. On the morning of March 3rd, around 10 a.m., Preeti called her younger sister to say she would be home in a couple of hours. That was the last time anyone heard from her. Her family expected her to be home by lunchtime, but she never arrived. It was unusual for her phone to be off. By 3 p.m., worry turned into panic. Preeti was always in contact and would inform someone if she was running late. Her family quickly began reaching out to her friends and coworkers to find out where she might be. It was then they discovered that she had been seen at a conference with her ex, Harshvardhan, who was reportedly trying to reconnect with her and had been persistent. Nithya attempted to call Harshvardhan, but he either ignored her calls or didn't answer, even though his phone was still on. On the evening of March 3rd, the Reddy family went to the police to report Preeti missing, expressing their concerns that her ex-boyfriend might be involved. Simultaneously, they began their own search by reaching out to anyone who might have seen or talked to Preeti. Nithya also posted on social media, sharing recent photos and asking for any information to help locate her sister. Within 24 hours, her post reached nearly 2,000 people, including Preeti's former patients. Many offered to assist in the search or to help spread the word, but no one had any concrete information about Preeti's location. The only potential lead remained Harshvardhan, who continued to avoid answering calls. On the afternoon of March 4th, Harshvardhan finally took one of Nithya's calls. He responded in a disturbingly calm manner, stating that Preeti was an adult who would return soon. He acknowledged seeing her at the conference but claimed they had only spoken briefly before going their separate ways. Oddly, just an hour later, Harshvardhan called Nithya back, this time very angry. He yelled at her, asking why she was contacting his friends, family, and co-workers about Preeti. He accused the Reddy family of unfairly blaming him and damaging his reputation without any proof. His reaction raised serious concerns. While he showed little worry about Preethi's sudden disappearance or the possibility that she might be in danger, he seemed more upset that people were searching for her and that attention was being directed at him. After discovering the situation, it was clear that Preethi had agreed to meet Harshvardhan for dinner, and he likely became the last person to see her. Harshvardhan's family urged him to go to the police and provide a full account before any formal summons. Later that day, he went to a police station in Sydney, saying he wanted to assist and share what he knew. Officers quickly noticed his unusual behavior. He was sweating, visibly anxious, and pacing while gesturing wildly. He claimed to have seen Preethi not only at a conference but also during dinner on March 2nd. He stated that they had a final conversation that helped them both move on, and that he called her a cab, which he said was the last time he saw her. However, there were inconsistencies in his story. When asked to repeat the events, he became confused, contradicted himself, and struggled to keep his timeline consistent. Despite his odd behavior, the police had no solid evidence to detain him, so they let him go. Before he left, a detective casually mentioned that they were examining surveillance footage that might show the movements of both Preethi and Harshvardhan that evening, intending to reconstruct the timeline. This statement appeared to unsettle Harshvardhan. A few hours later, he returned to the police station and changed his story. He confessed that he hadn't called a cab for Preethi. She had actually driven herself in her own car, which was the same Volkswagen Golf they had used to go to the restaurant. When questioned about why he had initially lied, he said he was nervous and didn't think those details were important. Later that day, on March 4th, news reported a serious car accident on the New England highway. A BMW had sped into oncoming traffic and collided head-on with a truck. The driver was pronounced dead at the scene and was identified as Dr. Harshvardhan Nard. This raised the question, how did he end up in such a terrible accident on a mostly empty road? Surveillance footage showed that Harshvardhan had quickly sped up and deliberately driven into the truck's path. This incident appeared to be an act of self-harm, and further evidence soon supported this idea. It was evident that the detective's mention of the footage had left Harshvardhan visibly shaken. He likely understood that investigators would soon reconstruct the events of the entire evening. The day after Harshvardhan's death, Preethi's abandoned Volkswagen Golf was discovered in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Sydney. Inside the trunk, in a large blue suitcase, was her lifeless body. Forensic investigators later confirmed that she had suffered a severe head injury and multiple stab wounds, 11 in total, mostly to her neck and back. 2 days later, after reviewing security footage and interviewing witnesses, the police were able to piece together the events of March 2nd. Preethi had agreed to meet Harshvardhan for dinner, likely seeking closure and trying to move on from their relationship. A waiter, who overheard parts of their conversation, remembered that Preethi appeared upset and frightened. After dinner, they drove around for a few hours before arriving at Swissôtel Hotel. It is suspected that he emotionally manipulated her, a tactic he had used in the past, making her feel guilty. Since she was never seen leaving the hotel, detectives believe that the tragic event likely took place in the room. A forensic investigation uncovered traces of blood in the bathroom, although it had been cleaned so thoroughly that housekeeping noticed nothing unusual. It is thought that Preethi went to the bathroom to call her new partner, and that Harshvardhan, overhearing the call, became enraged. Once she ended the call, he attacked her from behind, hitting her on the head and then inflicting multiple wounds with a sharp object. After finishing what he had to do, Harshvardhan calmly cleaned himself up and went to the front desk to extend his stay for another night. He had breakfast in the hotel restaurant before heading out to shop at local stores. There, he bought a large blue suitcase and various cleaning supplies. He returned to his hotel room around 5 p.m., checked out, and when a staff member offered to help with his luggage, they remarked that the suitcase seemed quite heavy. Harshvardhan casually explained that he had bought too many gifts for his family. He then loaded his belongings into Preethi's Volkswagen Golf and drove to a quiet corner of the city, where he parked the car in a discreet spot, hoping it would remain unnoticed for some time. After everything that happened, Harshvardhan picked up his BMW from the parking garage and drove home to Tamworth. On the way, He stopped at a gas station to fill his tank and grab some coffee. Several witnesses later identified him there, noting that his phone kept ringing, but he either declined the calls or ignored them. It was later confirmed that those calls were from Nichola, who was desperately trying to contact him while looking for her sister. Harshwarden likely thought he had committed the perfect crime, covering his tracks so well that investigators wouldn't be able to connect him to anything. He hadn't considered that there were surveillance cameras at almost every place he and Preeti had gone that day. Those recordings would soon reveal the truth. When Harshwarden understood his error that the police would have clear evidence of his involvement, he decided not to wait for an arrest or trial. Instead, he took control of the situation and ended his life before justice could catch up with him. Harshwarden's family, despite the increasing evidence against him, struggled to accept the idea that he could commit such a terrible act. They found it hard to believe he could take another person's life in such a brutal and deliberate way. Meanwhile, the Reddy family, grieving the loss of their cherished daughter and sister, decided to take action. They started a campaign to create the first center in Australia focused on helping women impacted by domestic violence. This center would not only provide emotional support, but also offer safe housing, legal advice, and help for those trying to leave abusive or manipulative relationships. The Reddy family played a key role in supporting the project by providing funding, using their voices to raise public awareness through media and outreach. They made sure that people in need were aware of a safe place to go, where they could find both protection and support for healing.